David Lichtenstein, and welcome to the Yeshiva Shalmaila. Well, this month we broke our record. We had 80,000 downloads. So I want to thank all our Chaverim here in the Yeshiva Shalmaila for helping us with the ideas for shiurim topics that you're interested in them. It's obviously working. And this week we have a fascinating topic, maybe the oldest conflict in the world. What does it say when the prophet will come, when an Eliyahu will come? The Heshiv leiv avos al banim. He will recreate the relationships. He will reform. He will improve the relationships between parents and children. So we're going to be speaking about kivud ab v'em. Can you ever talk back to a parent? We're always taught the story of Dama ben Asina. Well, does that mean, do parents have obligations to respect their children too? We're going to be speaking about dealing with critical or abusive parents, if anybody knows a parent like that. Elderly parents, putting them into a nursing home. How much disruption in your life do you have to absorb as part of Kibbud Av V'Em? What happens if you're newly married and we have the mother-in-law syndrome, and when it's damaging Shalom Bais? Do parents, talking to a psychologist about your parents. You know the old story, there were three Jewish ladies and they were talking about their sons. So one said, "My son is the best in the world." He said, "Every Erev Shabbos, no matter when, I get a bouquet of flowers." And the next one says, "My son, every year I get a shiny new Lexus." And the third one says, no, my son is the best. Do you know, every week he spends $250 to talk to somebody for an hour just about me. So this is, are you allowed to speak? Is it Kibbud Av? Is it a problem with Moirav? There's a din of Moirav. Or makwa, to embarrass, to speak to a psychologist about your parents? Would it be a problem of moira? Is there ever a time you can yell back? So it's a very interesting program. Our guests, we will have from Monsey, Rabbi Yosef Viener. He's the Rav of Sha'ar, HaShomayim, a very popular speaker. And we will have from West Hempstead, an Alta Mirror, Rabbi Yehuda Kelemer, Rav of the Young Israel of West Hempstead. We will have Rabbi Yitzchok Eizik Silva, the Rosh Bais of Yerushalayim, author of many best-selling halacha sfarim. We will have from New York, that's Dr. Benzion Sorotzkin. He specializes in conflict between parents and children. He's been speaking to Paiskim, Rabbanim, Gedolim. He'll convey some of their psakim. So we really have a wonderful program. You know, we mentioned the story of Dama ben Asina. For some reason, we won't go into it. We learn a lot of the halachas of Kibbud Av from a guy, Dama ben Asina, who wasn't Jewish. And I saw a remarkable story. You know, I'm in the real estate business. So the rule is, if you are in a rent-controlled apartment in New York City, a rent-stabilized apartment, you have to live there. In other words, it can't be a second home. In fact, some landlords do is they'll put in cameras. They'll check if somebody lives in the Hamptons and they use it, they're paying $195 for a rent-controlled apartment in New York City. They'll try to evict them, and they will usually be successful if they can prove it's a second home. So here's a story. Hudson Cliff Building Company versus Horaah, a Greek lady. She had a rent-stabilized apartment, and her landlord was trying to get her out because she spent several years in Greece looking after her sick mother who eventually died. When she tried to return to her apartment, the landlord claimed that it wasn't her primary residence and tried to evict her. And the judge ruled in her favor, and they said, no, it was her primary residence, even though she was gone for 3 or 4 years taking care of her mother. A 3-judge panel allowed her to remain in the apartment. And they wrote like this. Listen to astounding. This is a Musa statement from a Goyisha landlord court in New York City. There was a time when many cultures, when the sick of an elderly parent by a child was the hallmark of familial responsibility. But times change. Mothers or fathers would often live under the same roof, and hands-on care was provided. But today it's different. To the outsider, considerable sacrifice seemed involved. But for the caregiver child, this was the natural progression of life's journey. Sad to say, as with so many old-fashioned value adherence dims with each generation, the guy is writing this, saying, sadly, people get rid of their parents, or they don't care. They send them to nursing homes, basically death boxes in many cases. Where, it was in the big New York Times expose this week, how they just keep cutting services and food and any way you could cut to become profitable. But he says, but there are those dwindling in number who remain students of the old school, staying true to tradition and giving life to the words, my mother shall never go to a nursing home. So a judge recently said, we have to learn from Mrs. Parandapoulou, and they did not allow her to evict, a current-day Dama Benesina story. So we'll be speaking about Kibbud Av V'Em. Now, we have some very interesting topics coming up. Next week, Tisha B'Av, understanding as a Maimon the Holocaust. How could the Holocaust happen to the Jewish people? We will have, from the Litvish world, somebody to explain to us Rav Hutner's Shita, Rabbi Vigdamila. We'll have somebody from the Satmar to explain the Satmar Rebbe Shita, the Lubavitcher Rebbes. We'll try to get numerous opinions to speak about something that has always astounded many of us. How could, as a Maimon, how do we understand the Holocaust? I thought for Tisha B'Av, that's an appropriate topic for this time of year. You can always call into our phone lines, leave a message. I try to respond. If somebody from the office tries to respond, as many as possible, we get a lot of messages. In the United States, it's 732-806-8700. One of the prompts is to leave a message. In England, it's 4433-011-70250. And in Israel and Eretz Yisrael, it's 02 Yerushalayim 372-0304. Or you can email me at info@headlinesbook.com. That's info@headlinesbook.com. We try to respond to as many as possible. So here's a riddle, this week's riddle. And it was sent to me by Yeshua Duker. Shout out to him. And it's from Reb Chaim Berlin. If we have any Chaim Berliners listening, your namesake asked the following riddle. And it was printed in Reb Issa Zalman's Kuntris Yagdal Torah in Slutsk. So if you're from Lakewood, maybe it's Reb Issa Zalman, Reb Aaron Kotler's Shver. It was in his, he brings this Chakira Nifla in this week's Parsha. He says, what happens if somebody's Megarish Ishta, he makes a get, from today, but la'achar shloshim yom, he makes the get is chal from today if you fulfill the following condition. And what is the following condition? You can't eat anything usser for the next 30 days. You have to be totally makbid on all dvarim asurim should not enter your mouth. But if you eat anything usser, retroactively it's not a get. If you don't eat anything usser, retroactively you're divorced from today. Well, during that month, what happened? She was maybe trying to lose weight or something, or trying to not get cavities. So she made a neder, she won't eat ice cream. Well, her husband heard about it. He was still her husband till after the 30 days, and he said, oh my goodness, I'm afraid she's going to eat ice cream. So he was made for the neder. And he said, it's not a neder. This week's parsha, husband is allowed to be made for the neder. So what happens? Bais, she said, oh, he was made for the neder? Good. So she went ahead and she ate ice cream, because the neder is batal. So here's the conundrum. If you say at the end of 30 days, she didn't eat anything asur, she was a good girl, she ate only kosher, and the ice cream she ate was after the hafara, so she's megureshes, retroactively, mehayim. Okay, she's megureshes retroactively from today. Well, guess what? Then 2 weeks later, when she ate the ice cream, her husband was not able to be made for the neder, because he wasn't her husband anymore, because it's retroactive. If her husband wasn't able to be made for the neder, then it becomes asur. She was over on Bal Yachal. If it becomes asur, so then retroactively, she's not megureshes. Well, if she's not megureshes, and he is her husband, then 2 weeks later when he was mefer, she was allowed to eat the ice cream, because it was her husband who was being mefer. So she's an endless loop. If it's, you go back, me'achshav, from today, if the get is chal, then he's allowed to be mefer. If the get is not allowed to be chal, he's not allowed to be mefer. So what do? It's a chakira nifla. Reb Chaim Berlin said, I have no answer to this. Is this woman megureshes? Is she not megureshes? If anybody has a response, please send it in. Of course, at the end of the show, we will play the riddle winner. And by the way, we got a very good email this week. He said, please play somebody, the winner, who not only has the correct answer, but who is concise. Because honestly, there are people who do get the right answers, but it's a 7-minute answer, and that's too long. Okay. So on this week's time of day, I like to say a vart. Here's a vart. So I get a caller, and sometimes I call back, and this guy's telling me, can I speak to him? What do you speak to? Unhappily married people. He's so unhappily married for a litany, 25 different reasons. His wife doesn't respect him. He doesn't respect her. He's, the usual, right? It happens to everybody at some point. And I was thinking, I said to him, I don't know why God sent me this to say, the Bais sent me. I said, we're into 3 weeks. And the Beis HaMikdash was nechrav because of sinas chinam. So it's really a good time to talk about, how do we love somebody else? And more than that, this guy was miserable. I said, how do we love life? In bad times, the question is, how do we love life? So I said, how do we have happier lives? Wouldn't you like to be happier? I know I would. Right? So, this time of the year, sinas chinam, everybody's talking about Lashon Hara, the Lashon Hara Chafetz Chaim Heritage Foundation on Tisha B'Av has this huge thing, etc. And I want to say a lot of people missed the boat. I just heard a very funny story from a Hatzalah member. He said they get calls all the time. So he said this guy calls Hatzalah, and he's screaming. He says, my wife is in labor. What should she do? So the Hatzalah member says, is this her first child? He says, no, it's not her first child. This is her husband speaking. So people miss the boat very often. And I think on Lashon Hara, a lot of people miss the boat. Oh, if you don't speak Lashon Hara, you're going to go to heaven. If you do speak Lashon Hara, the other person's Averis become your Averis. Their mitzvahs become your mitzvahs. That's all very fine. It's wonderful. But I think that's missing the boat. The Medrash says, it's a Medrash in Mitzayra, the Medrash says, there was a merchant, a roichel, he was a peddler, and he was going from town to town. He said, who wants to live the good life? Who wants a happy life? I have the potion for it. And people came running, and they said, really? What's the potion? It's brought with a little bit of differently, B'shinoi K'tzas and Avodah Zarah Testament Bais. So the man said, the potion? It's very simple. Who wants life? Who wants the good life? I have yamim, to love days, to get up in the morning and say, oh my God, it's another Monday morning. Do you know the things that I have to do today? Do you know what all the errands, the principals, the teachers, the negotiations, the boss, the shidduch. Who wants to love today? Not get up in the morning and with a migraine. I have yamim. Liroy's type, to see the good. How do we see the good in life? Because everybody's life has good. Let's face it, we live in the most affluent time in history. I was in a taxi cab in Eretz Yisrael a number of years ago. The taxi cab driver was fetching, and I said to him, could you imagine if you would be as well off as David HaMelech? He said, then I would be happy. I said it was a 90-degree day or a 95-degree in Yerushalayim. I said, look, you're holding a can of cold Coke. He said, David HaMelech, when it was 95 degrees, right? Did he ever have access to a cold Coke? There was nothing cold. There was some slave waving a fan at him. He didn't have air conditioning. And if he needed his tooth pulled, I said, what did they do? They pulled in a guy with a plier. Today we have dental, we have heating, we have air conditioning, we have food. When you sit down by the table, the food could be coming from 3 continents. We have never had a better, more affluent style of living. But what's the problem? Liroy's taiv. How do we see the good, this Reichel said? So he said, Nitzoyer l'shayin chameira. If we stop thinking bad, if we stop seeing the bad in others, we start seeing the good in ourselves too. If we start to focusing on what is the good in our life, I said to this guy, your wife, let me ask you something. Is she like a witch? He says, no, she's actually very nice and this and that. I say, is she a good, well, she is a good, that she is. I say, is she a good mother? He says, well, that she is. I said, does she cook? Yeah, does she cook? So I said, write down 20 things now that are good. And write down, by the way, I said to him, 20 good things that are good about yourself too. You know what I have? I have in my BlackBerry or my iPhone, I have a list. I call it the inventory list. And the inventory list is every time I get a good email or something good happens, I write it down on the list. And when I'm having a bad day, I look at that list and I say, this is good, this is good. And what is that? That is the essence of what not speaking Lashon Hara is about. It's not, la 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 la. It's not about just speaking about other people. It's how do we alirois tov? How we less judgmental? How do we cast away those foolish ideas of perfection? Because if you know anybody perfect, I don't know anybody perfect, and if I did, I wouldn't want to have anything to do with them, because they certainly wouldn't be able to coexist with me. How do we stop judging others? Doesn't it have a danas kol adam l'kavschus? So now in the 3 weeks, if you want to have better relationships with others, you want to have a havas chinam, and to be mechaper on sinas chinam, and more than that, if we want to be happier, if you want to be happier, it's a really good time to listen to the message of the Chafetz Chaim. But don't miss the message. No, it's not her first child speaking. It's the husband, right? It's the message is see the good. Write a personal inventory. Somebody you dislike, write 10 good things about them. And I promise you, you will find 10 good things about them. Write 10 good things about yourself. Do it every single day. And that's how we can be mechaper on sinas chinam and live happier lives. Let's go to our wonderful guest. We have the honor of having with us from Monsey, New York, the Rav of Sha'ar HaShomayim in Monsey. He's a Talmud of the Mir, Talmud of Rav Ruderman, Zechariah Levracha. He published for Art Scroll Contemporary, Halacha and Hashkafa. He's a musmach of Reb Simcha Cook, Rabbi Yosef Viener. Welcome, Rabbi Yosef.
Thank you. Thank you for having me back.
So, Rabbi Viener, if you have somebody's going to be take care of their parents, and they live in another neighborhood, maybe they're coming from Lakewood to New York, from Monsey to New York, from Baltimore, from wherever they are, and they're flying in from Eretz Yisrael to take care of one of their parents or both of their parents for a few weeks, and the ticket is $1,200. Who pays for the ticket?
An excellent question. So let me just give you a little bit of a background. As you know, the Gemara raises the Shaila in general, Kibadav, Mishalav, and Mishal Ben. We paskin Mishalav, which means the parents normally pay. The common scenario would be they're unable to go shopping, you're saving them the schlep, or they can't get out, and you're bringing it to them, or you're even cooking them dinner. And then you have a $200 shopping bill. Can you give them the bill? The answer is yes, obviously in a tactful way, if they can afford it. If they can't afford it, then stuck-up begins at home, and that has to be taken care of by the children based on their relative ashiras one to the other. But assuming, Baruch Hashem, they can afford it, then there's nothing wrong with them covering the bill and you asking in a tactful way. The interesting thing is that Sternbach has a tshuva in Tshuvas Van Hogus, where he points out an interesting chakira which answers the question I always had, and that is, Kibbut Aim is considered the Chamurish of the Chamuris in the Seres Adibris, and Hishva Kvedim L'Chved Amakom. And all of a sudden over here, all of the mitzvahs you have to spend money on is Davar Pashut, up to 50-year assets for a mitzvah saseh, and all of a sudden, Dafka by Kibbut Aim, which is for the most serious, all of a sudden we pass you don't have to spend money. Why is that? So the answer, which he sort of develops, is that if you have a situation where they have money and they just need you to help with the shopping or help with the cooking or whatever servicing you're doing, why should you pay? They can, Baruch Hashem, pay for themselves. It's their regular bills. But if you're doing things that, we'll call it small change, although the $1,200 is not a small change. We'll get back to that in a moment. If you're calling them, can you bill them for the $5 phone call? If you're sending them a letter, can you bill them for the stamps? So Sternbach suggests, and I didn't see this in any other tshuvas, that's why I'm quoting the tshuvas on Huggis, I think it's very mistaber that anything you would do for a friend, anything you do as part of a relationship, you have a friend who has a chasna in Chicago, you get on a plane, you go to the chasna. If you can afford it, do you send them the bill? Of course not. So parents are not worse, the logara, from your friends, from regular things you do in a regular relationship. And I think there's a lot to be said. I didn't see anybody who points that out. I saw somebody brings down, Rav Moshe might have been masupik about this, but the $1,200 would depend on what their financial situation is. And if they can well afford it and they're booking tickets, flying to Israel for chasnas and coming in for visits and going to Switzerland and visiting friends in California, all of a sudden when it comes to their parents, they want to bill their parents, I believe, and Sternbach seems to certainly deal with this, I believe that it's not so pashut to put that under the general heading of Mishal Lav and Mishal Ben.
Well, Rabbi Viener, I would say a different svara. Besides the excellent svara you're saying, I would say a different svara. I would say the halacha of Mishal Ava Mishal Ben, the Gemara in Kedushin and Lamed Beis, is discussing the mitzvah of Kibud Av, which the Rashba and the Rosh Mishan says is something that they derive direct benefit from. In other words, if you buy them clothing, if you buy them food, you clean something of theirs, it's direct benefit. Your coming to them is not something that they have direct benefit from. That is a hechsher mitzvah, you flying in.
Right.
The din of Mishal Ava Mishal Ben is something where you are actually Mekayim the mitzvah. Here you're not Mekayim the mitzvah. It just facilitates your ability to be Mekayim the mitzvah. So that would not be Mishal Ava Mishal Ben.
That's as far, that might get into a machlekes, which is a big machlekes, Achreinim and maybe Rishonim, depends which diukim you make in the sugya there, on whether or not any action which is not servicing the parent, is that under kibbut av aim? If you're being sensitive to them, if you're arguing with them, if you cause them an tsar, that's a violation, obviously, of yiras av aim. But if it's not direct servicing, is it covered? Many Rishonim Achronim seem to hold not so, although it's a wonderful thing to bring them nachas. The Chaznish and many others say that it's not so simple, and that would go into the general aspect of kibbud. And the question is shopping, what you're raising, is shopping the hechsher mitzvah or just part of the general package? And there are definitely those who say that. It might be somewhat of a machlekes. There's a famous Maisa that speaks to this, by the way, where there was somebody whose father was in Warsaw and he needed to see him, and he called and he asked for him, and he was in Brisk, and he asked Reb Chaim, I don't have a lot of money, and I don't think my father's going to pay me back, and the train ticket costs money. People were poor, and it's not that he couldn't scrape it together, but he doesn't think he's going to get paid back. We paskin mishalav. Does he have to pay for the train ticket when he knows he certainly might not get paid back? So Chaim said, you're absolutely right, walk. So that story, which is quoted widely by Tshuvas, is, I thought, first time I saw it, a tremendous chiddush, because you would think most people don't walk from Brisk to Warsaw. It's 130 miles plus. So if you're going out, I wasn't in Europe. My conjecture is that there were poor people who did walk from town to town. Sometimes they got a hitch on a horse and buggy, but they often walked much of the way, and therefore it was a real option. If you're taking the train for your convenience, then maybe you should have to pay. That's how they understand Reb Chaim's point. Your case, Eretz Yisrael, if somebody's going to California, nobody walks, nobody even takes the train or the bus unless they're touring. They only fly. So, l'cheira, if you're not doing this for your convenience, then, according to the sources that we're discussing, maybe you couldn't bill the parents. If the parents are going to pay and you say it is under Mishal Av, if you want to fly business and they would pay for a coach, then that extra upgrade, certainly Reb Chaim would say you have to pay for. So that scenario would be totally in this.
So Rabbi Viener, isn't the consensus among, I understand that there's the Chazanish and I believe one or two others who believe that Mechabdei Begufa, it goes beyond that. Mm-hmm. But I believe that the Marik, which the Ramah brings the halacha, says clearly.
The Marik by the Shidduchim, that you don't have to listen to the parents. The problem is the Marik has three reasons, and we don't know which one the Ramah is holding like.
That's correct, but the Marik is brought la halacha. The Rosh Mishans and the Rashba, both Rishonim, even though there could be that the Chazanish learns it from Sha'ar and the Rashba, but seem to say very clearly, the Russian of the Rosh Mishan that the Marik brings says it has to be something that he's dafke nene begufay. But I think more than that, I think that if somebody has to buy an esrig and they have to take a train to town, it would be hard to say that, if somebody wants to give tzedakah to a yeshiva and they have to take a train to the yeshiva, could you say that they should take the train cost of the cost of the tzedakah? I mean, bringing you to the place where you will do the mitzvah is a stretch to say that is really...
Yeah, the example you just gave happened to be interesting because many mishalochim or people traveling to collect for yeshivas indeed do take that off the top to be able to put that into the expense. But the point is certainly a possibility. There is a debate in the Achronim whether that mitzvah of going shopping or traveling is a hechsher mitzvah or not, which is why, by the way, the question almost begs itself when a family is living in close proximity and the children move away, is that good for their ruchnius and their kibbut av aim to be moving away from parents when at the end of the day, they're not going to be around that much to be able to do the mitzvah as well or with the same consistency. And whenever they come in, it's traveling and it's expensive. And then these shilas come up with who pays the bill. There's certainly a hider to live close by the parents, which I guess in Europe was done more often than not. In our very mobile society, it's a shayla that comes up a lot, and people have to know that whatever cheshbonos you have for parnasa and things like that, you have to move. There are many considerations. It's not usher, but it's certainly a hider to try to make it work in closer proximity.
Back upon what you just discussed, the Aruch HaShulchan in Reish Mem Sivkat Lamed Vav says that even though a child is allowed to move away for parnasa or to learn, but he says you can't move away for anything else.
Right.
And he brings a proof. He says his proof is that Yaakov Avinu was nenash from not being able to mekayim kibbud av v'eib all the years he was by Lavan. He says for the 14 years he was by Shem Ve'ever, he was a nenash. Mm-hmm. For the years he was by Lavan, he was nenash. So he says, you see that except for limud haTorah or parnasa, there is no heta. So if a child comes to you and he says, listen, I really want to move to Chicago. My wife's family is there. Or I want to move to Eretz Yisrael. And not because I want to learn there, because let's put that aside. That would be its own can of issues. But it's because, I'm a Zionist. And the parents say, we'd love to have you nearby. And they came to you, to the Rav, and he said, what's the halacha? It's kibbud av v'eim. We don't think that he should be allowed to move. It's not parnasa. Why is it different than Yaakov Avinu? How would you respond to that?
So there are two different issues. Eretz Yisrael happens to be a very big machlekes. There are fascinating tshuvas written on it. Yosef has a tshuva, as do many others. Rabbi says moving to Eretz Yisrael today is a mitzvah kiyumis, not a mitzvah chiyuvis. So it would be more debatable. You'd have to be moving for ruchniistic reasons. You mentioned the Zionism, which is a separate ball of wax. But we certainly have a netiya of many young people who want to move there. They can learn here, but they want to be in Eretz Yisrael, and they feel it's good for their ruchnius, and they feel it's a kiyum mitzvah, or either a mitzvah kiyumis or a mitzvah chiyuvis. So many poskim say it's not only totally in whether you hold this kiyumis or chiyuvis, but obviously that will play a role. Many poskim say you can, the diukim from the medrash lech lecha me'artzecha lech lecha was said to Avraham Avinu, and the diuk, one medrash is lecha, I'm giving you a heter to leave your old father, but nobody else. And some bring from here that you're not allowed to go to Israel if your parents want you here and need you here. And others say, no, that was only because Israel didn't have Kedusha yet at that time, and therefore it was a special dispensation for Avraham Avinu, or because Avraham Avinu was a very high-profile gadol, and everybody was looking at him for direction in their ruchnius, and he's leaving his old father, it'd be a bigger chilul Hashem. We're talking about where the parents can be obviously taken care of. It's not a sakana issue, but the jury's still out on whether Eretz Yisrael would trump the issue of kibbud av v'eim or not. That's one shayla. As a second shayla, you asked about generally moving away. Doesn't need the parnasa, or he has a parnasa, he wants a bigger parnasa, and he wants to move. So you have to do, in terms of parnasa, what you're happy with, and the person has to decide whether the bigger parnasa is just more money or it's something he's going to need later on. You have to put into the equation his wife. She's mishabedes to her husband in kibbud av v'eim, but you have to, in-laws are also din kibbud, you have to put into the equation how much is moving or not moving affecting the shalom bayis, affecting the children. And you also have to put into the equation if a person unfortunately didn't yet nail down their kibbud av v'eim to perfection. Sometimes if they're living too close, this shouldn't be the case most of the time, but sometimes living too close, it could be the law of diminishing returns. And sometimes a little bit of distance is healthy. Hopefully those do come up, hopefully not in the majority of the cases. So a lot goes into the picture, but the Aruch HaShulchan is just echoing what we should really look upon in any area of Avodas Hashem. Is you should put yourself in a matzav where you're able to do the mitzvah to the maximum, not just get by b'diavad, and moving away from parents takes away that opportunity.
Do we have a raya from anywhere that you're allowed to go to Eretz Yisrael and not do what Yaakov Avinu did? Yaakov Avinu was nenash. Or is there a raya from any place?
The fact that Yaakov Avinu nenash is a chiddush nifla as it is, it's a gemara, but Lamaisa, he was sent by his mother to find the shidduch. He volunteered 7 years, and the only pshat I have, it's still very, very hard to understand. He volunteered 7 years because he thought Lavan wouldn't go for any less. He didn't know what the number was. When you're negotiating for a deal, you never know what the other person's thinking. He volunteered 7 years. That became 14 years, and then he had to make some parnasa. And yet, kibbud av v'em is so chomer that he was punished for that on his madrega, of course. And I think the reason why the Chazal highlighted is to teach us that moving away and staying away and missing an opportunity to kibbud av v'em is a serious, serious issue. With that said, Yaakov Avinu was obviously held to a very, very high level of accountability, but the lesson is still important. Before a person makes such a move, it's a serious move in life, and they have to know that they're giving up a lot, and we don't want it to be to their detriment. We want people to have arichas yamim. We want people to be able to give their parents nachas, and the parents do need help. So it's a serious decision. It has to be discussed. It's a shayla like any other shayla, just with many very serious ramifications.
Yeah, and here's the lashon of the Aruch HaShulchan. He says, "Imreitza leilech v'lo moed biracheres yachel leilech shalai b'rishus avavimai." He says, "V'nir mizek shehaylech lemitzvah acheres, even if it's for a mitzvah, tzarich rishus avavimai."
And rishus means that you have to get real rishus.
Permission. You would have to get the
real
permission.
Real permission, not just like, yes, I'm going. Can you please say yes?
Yeah. He says, because Eizik b'mitzvah patim and a mitzvah ech yazev mitzvahs kibod v'yitel mitzvah acheres. Kein yirli midivri atur v'shulchan aruch sef yud gimel. And he brings a raya. He says, because the Shulchan Aruch says only Talmud Torah is gadol mikol ha-mitzvahs. He says Talmud Torah is gadol. Without that, even another mitzvah you would not be able for the purpose of kibbud av v'em. Very surprising. I mean, it's a good raya from Yankif, and here this gets into another question. At what point do you say? I mean, the Gemara says Rab Asi's mother harassed him to no end. Whatever he did, she wanted something better. She wanted a shidduch. She wanted a shidduch just like him, which wasn't very possible for her. It seems she was a very aged woman at that point. So what did he do? He left and he went to Eretz Yisrael. He couldn't be mechabed her anymore. At what point do you say kibbud av v'em has become too difficult and the parents are too demanding and I just don't want to do it? It's just disrupting my life and I don't have to do it. I can leave. How would you say that in modern terms? How do you reach that decision?
It's a very important question, and just in broad strokes, people have to put the kibbud av v'em on the pedestal that Chazal put it on. It's in the Aseret Dibros for a reason, one of the few mitzvahs aseh that made it there. And before anybody even asks the question, they have to, in their own mind, internalize how important kibbud av v'em is. And like any mitzvah, certainly a mitzvah in the Aseret Dibros, we have to be motzei nefesh. Question you're asking is, to what point? So obviously the balance in very broad strokes, everybody has to ask their own personal shayla because the details here are crucial, but the person has to honestly ask themselves, it's difficult, it's challenging, that's why Kosh Baruch Hu offered arichas yamim. The Mefarshim say that person should realize, and certainly this is a motivating factor, that whatever he does with his parents, he will get rewarded in kind, not only arichas yam be'olam hazeh be'olam haba, but also treatment by his children in a ruchniistic way and also a practical way. They watch what he or she are doing. And that's important to keep in mind. Understand the mitzvah comes, certainly as it continues, they should live by arichas yamim. It comes with challenges and it's not easy. So built in to the mitzvah is the fact that it's not easy and it takes mesirus nefesh. With that said, it's important to understand that chayecha kaimin in a way that if you can't function or if the shalom bais becomes an issue, there are many tshuvas written on the issue of taking parents into the house versus a nursing home, assisted facilities. There are different scenarios where it's necessary medically. There are scenarios where, due to the shalom bayis issue or the fact the house is too small, the dir is too small, they just can't. And then there are situations where they can, it's just very difficult, but no one's going to argue. Even the best nursing home is not as good as the care they're going to get in their children's home. And the fact that it's difficult doesn't mean you back away. Sternbach in a different tshuva points out that a person who has their parents with him, it's a mitzvah they get many, many times a day, every single day. So they have to know what they're giving up and what the opportunity is. With that said, if they can't function and it's becoming a law of diminishing returns that they're in negative territory, they're doing more averas, they're getting more upset, they're more seisers, they're vrayim, they're arguing more, there's more kasam achleikes than they're accomplishing in the positive way, then it becomes, like the Rambam says, in the extreme case, Avasi's mother, then you're mitzvah somebody else to take care of them, and you make sure they're looked after and they're very cared for. You don't drop, obviously, the relationship. You, wherever they are, you're visiting, you're involved as much as you can. Here the question is, are you in the same exact city? Are you in the same exact country? Are they in your house or are they in a facility, if need be? The first thing you have to do when you approach the question is first understand the chashivas and kibbud aim so you know what you're dealing with, and then talk about, is it Mesiras Nefesh, or is it something that's not doable and it's affecting the day-to-day life, the day-to-day running the family, and it's just not shaykh to do. And that takes an objective opinion to really hear the tzadim.
Rabbi Viener, but what are you basing that on halachically? In other words, what's the conclusion
the
based
fact
on?
is that we don't have kibbud avim listed as an exception that you have to do more than a fifth of your assets. And a fifth of your assets is not only money, it's the amount you would pay, lamashal, to get out of a situation. Would a person be in such Sha'ar or here in such emotional turmoil that they would gladly pay more than a fifth of their assets to get out of it? It's that hard, and sometimes it is. And in that case where it is, then if they deputter, we don't have a raya that kibbud aim, you'd have to spend more than a fifth of your assets. And we don't have a raya that it separates itself from any other mitzvahs aseh, so that would certainly be a possible gather. There's also a famous machlokes b'chai adam and other achronim, how much you have to put yourself out for other mitzvahs in general. Chai adam talks about traveling to a different city to get to Kiyah Shofar, and many say that you do have to travel. He has rayas, maybe you don't, although it's a positive thing to do. So you'd have to first take a position on that and then try to fit it in the gather of, even if you have to, is there a gather something equal to giving away a 50-year asset? It's a lot of money. It would be painful, chas v'shalom, to lose 21% of your money. But if the equivalent therein is here, the emotional turmoil, the shalom bias, or whatever the case may be, of staying more involved versus slightly less involved, then I think that would be a good gather.
Okay. Can I suggest another possible gather that, being that, and again, I didn't see this in the Paiskim, so it's a little bit of guesswork, but the halacha is, l'mashal, that you need to do bittul malacha. So you have to take a day off. But yet the halacha is for parnasasa, you're allowed to move away. So the way I understand it is that kibbud aim is mishal av. If you lose a day of work, I'm sorry, every mitzvah requires some type of a cost. There's no mitzvah, right? But where it becomes such an imposition that it's totally disrupted the life of the giver, at that point it's not mishal av anymore, but it's mishal ben.
But that's the same, we're agreeing. That's the same gather.
Right, I'm giving it, you're saying it a kloliistic, by every mitzvah I say, it's a chaimesh.
It's never more than a chaimesh.
Never more than a chaimesh. And I'm saying that besides that, it could be even less than that in this case, where it rises to the level where you say, this is clearly Mishal Ben. It's on my cheshbon, it's not on his cheshbon. So it could be possibly even less than a fifth.
Right. The Mechaber, by the way, has a lashon which throws a little bit of a wrinkle into that. So the Mechaber, when he talks about when the parents can't afford, he says, Chayav l'chabda begufa alfal pisha mitaka baltul mimalachta v'yitzar lachsel psachim. He's not missing a day of work. He's so baltul mimalachta every day, every week, every month that he's going around begging. Now, Ramesha has a long tshuva on this, and the guy over there on that halacha feels that shouldn't be the din because that's a tremendous chiddush. That's way more than the equivalent of 50-year assets because basically he lost his job and he can't get work. And Ramesha seems to go with the guy in that's not a chiyuv, but the Mechaber himself paskins even to the extent he starts lachsa al psachim. So that point is a bit of a machlokes. That's pretty disconcerting in terms of his day-to-day life.
But let me just throw another. But what the halach is also that avedasai kaidemis lavedas aviv.
Correct.
Because it's Mishal Av. In other words, since it has to be at his dala, so my aveda comes before his aveda.
Right.
So you see that there is a very clear delineation. Is when it's on my back, so to say. I don't have to do it. But okay, we'll certainly accept. Certainly not more than a fifth. That's what you would say.
Or the equivalent in the emotional strain of what might be going on. If there is such emotional strain, most of the time, Baruch Hashem, it's doable. It's just hard, but it's doable. It's not. The family's not falling apart, and they look at it as a chutz, and it is, and they look at it as something that's good for their hakaras hatayv, the parents, which is what's behind this mitzvah, and good for the family.
And what about in general going to visit irreligious parents? Calls, etc. Is Bal Tshuva mechuyev to al kibbud aim?
The Pashtus, again, is according to the Mechaber. He would be anyway, according to the Ramon. By the way, I qualify that because the
Bach says it's
they're peskim that say it depends if he's a Rosh on certain Averas versus not a believer in Yud Gimel Ani Mam is the din of Ikaris, but let's assume that Tinik Shnishba doesn't have a din of Ikaris, and even the Ramon might be Moed. You have to do it in a way where And you have to be more careful because they're looking here. Their son became religious. He went to yeshiva in Israel, and he came back, and he has siblings. The family's watching. He has to be more careful to be mechabed because that's one thing they know about. They know about the fifth commandment. And they're going to use it, sometimes properly, sometimes improperly, and you can't give in. But where you can give in, it's a mitzvah to go the extra mile to show how respectful you are, and you're trying to give them nachas. Ultimately, you will give them nachas, and they'll be impressed. And often they see that the frum child has a wonderful family, l'shem l'seferis. But the danger, which you always have to be careful about, is you have to pick the venue, pick the event, and try to put in whatever you can in terms of safeguards. Yes, we're coming, but, we're religious. We appreciate you putting up with us. I know you don't understand it. And now I have children, and now I have boys, and we have to be extra careful with this, Shmir Seinayim, and no, we can't go over here. There are going to be all sorts of conditions, but if you make it clear how much you love them and care about them and want to be there when you can, often, Baruch Hashem, we have many wonderful Balei Tshuva in the community, and they make it work. Lamaisa, they find the areas where they can share common ground, and ultimately they give them a lot of nachas.
Yeah, but it is certainly, I know that there are those who believe that once somebody becomes a Baal Tshuva, they're supposed to blow up the relationship.
No.
There's halachically very suspect.
Very suspect.
And he could be over on Lamanya Richun Yamecha, but it's certainly a very big kula. Anybody who advises,
I think even more than that. So even for putting the kibbutz avim aside for a moment, which is obviously a big missed opportunity, there's a Kiddush Hashem aspect over here. If you could show you're being a mensch and you could show you're cooperating, and they understand that you're keeping mitzvahs, so why aren't you keeping the Aseret Dibros? There might be a big side, there's an actual chiyuv kibbutz avim, but it's more than that. Kiruv, even though the worst person to do kiruv often is a child, they say terach didn't become from until Avraham Avinu left. Avraham Avinu was the father of all kiruv. He was Makayev of the whole world. Why couldn't he be Makayev terach? The answer is it's hard to do when you're looking at the person you remember when they were 3 years old. So you got to be very careful, but the subtle Kiddush Hashem is that you're friendly, your family is friendly, they see your children growing up, and they see the tremendous haslacha you're having. That itself is the biggest Kiddush Hashem. In order to do that, you have to have interaction with them. On the other hand, you got to be careful. Too much interaction. The children grow up thinking that, they're nice people, which they are, Baruch Hashem, and their lifestyle is very different. Well, I can also be nice and be different. I've had that also in many situations, and the parents admitted to me afterwards they think they overdid it in terms of just showing that aspect that they're nice, wonderful people, which they are, without ever commenting that, by the way, our life is different and this is why. So it's a balance, and the children have to understand, and you have to explain to them at each stage in their life what exactly is going on and the purpose of why we're interacting and why we're trying to help them and why we have an allegiance to them.
So last question, Rabbi Viener.
Yes.
Adopted children. You have a child, he's adopted. Is there a chiyuv kibbutz av to his nurture or nature, his parents of birth or the parents who've been matriach for the last 25 years from his infancy to take care of him?
So there's certainly a chiyuv of akaras hatayv to those that raised him. Immense akaras hatayv, endless and eternal. With that said, kibbutz avim be'etzem with your real parents is exeris hakasav, even if you never met them, even if they didn't do such a great job, and if there are serious issues of real abuse that was really worked over. It's a difficult subject, not for now, between the Rav and the therapist and the children to find out, is it repairable, is it not? We can't sacrifice the children and their emotional stability, but you also can't put kibbutz avim under the carpet either. If all this is on par, which means he respects his adopted parents and he loves them and he has tremendous hakaras hatov, and he happens to meet his real parents, even if they didn't bring him up and they gave him away and they have tainas, understandably, emotionally, they gave him away. It's hard to explain that, even though it might have been the best thing for them if they couldn't handle them under that circumstance. It's difficult. That's why I tell them when they ask me, should I look for my parents? Should I open the file? There's no chiyuv in my mind, even though there's a chiyuv d'oraisa in mechaber them when you find them. You might be opening up a can of worms, and many of those that didn't work out as well. I don't blame them for being curious. I don't blame them for wanting to search. That's just not a tain on them. But in terms of hilchos kibbutz avim, to put yourself in a matzav where you don't know who it is now. Right now you're an onus, like Esther Hamalka, who needs that schus because she was never over in kibbutz avim, even though she wasn't mekayim it either. But she still needed that schus to completely beat out Haman and Amalek and Esav, who had the schus of kibbutz avim. So there are two questions here. Number one is, do you have to look for them? I believe the answer is not a simple yes. I've heard people claim, yes, you have to search for them. How else will you make kind of the mitzvah? That's assuming when you get there, the emotions will not take over and destroy the relationship. And that's not so simple because the emotions will run high for obvious reasons. If you do know who they are, even if you feel they gave you away, they didn't help you, if Lamaisa it's exactly which it is, there's a chiyuv, and Rav Nissen Karlis in Chut Shani points out that he goes on the Chayyadam, the famous Chayyadam, that you have to have kibbut aveim, machshava, b'maisa, b'diber, and you have to love them, and you have to mechabed them, and you have to look at them, she'idma be'enov, shem gedolim v'nechbadei aretz, the greatest people. So Chaim Shmulevitz is a famous shmooze. How does that work? You know they're average people. They're not the gedolei adar. So Chaim Shmulevitz says you have to look at certain tchunas hanefesh and certain milas they have that nobody else has, and harp on those milas. Rav Nissen says...
Rabbi, but wait, I just want to go back. Do you have a raya that it's the parents of birth and not the parents who brought you up?
It's pashut. They wouldn't need a raya.
Okay, I understand that. That's talking in a normal case, but let me tell you, a very famous person in our generation, what's his name, Jeff Bezos, was given up by his parents for adoption.
Right.
And he had no interest in who his father was, who gave him up. And in fact, he was asked once, a reporter famously found his father. He worked in a diner, and he said, you know, your son is the wealthiest man in the world. And then when they came back to Bezos, he says, I really have no interest in my father. The only time I'm interested was on a medical form. I'm asked for family diseases. He says, he abandoned me as an infant, and these people are my parents because they brought me up.
So I'll tell you what Nissen says. And Nissen says he feels that if you had somebody who saved your life, you never met the guy before, he disappeared right afterwards, and he saved your life. He saved your life. He saved you from financial ruin. He saved you. And you have endless hakaras hatov to that person, even though he's a banani, he's not such a chashuv person, and his midas are not that great, and he never showed up before, he never came since. That's how you have to look at kibbut aveim. Lamaisa, they gave birth to you. At the end of the day, they gave birth to you. They gave you life. I once had a teenager who was obviously in a very bad mood tell me that the Gemara in Erevin is better, we shouldn't be born, so I don't have to have hakaras hatov for that. So I reminded him he's in a bad mood, and the maskana of the Gemara is that life is an opportunity, and once we're here, we have wonderful things to do. And Lamaisa, if a person saved your life or they gave you life, not a very big nafkamina, and that Kzeis HaKosov goes on the parents, not on the person who developed it, and they deserve tremendous hakaras, and they even have a half a din.
I'm not disagreeing, Rabbi Viener, I'm not disagreeing. I'm just asking, is there a raya from Tanakh or from Shas Rishonim to this point? That was my only...
I think that the pasuk speaks for itself. You can't take the word kabedes avicha v'esemecha and say that it excludes your parents. You can add to it. You could say those who brought you up, those who taught you Torah.
But I think that it's fair to say that a parent is supposed to bring up a child, and it's not talking about a parent. Maybe he didn't abandon their child.
Happens to be that abandoning is very dependent. The word abandoning is very dependent on the circumstances. If the mother can't handle it, or the father can't handle it, it would be the biggest chesed in the world if they let somebody else who can do. It's a disaster if they hold on and they can't do it, and the child suffers because of that. So what you're terming abandoning doesn't really. I'm just looking
for a raya from.
I understand. I think it's posh. We have many rayas in the other direction. Moshe Rabbeinu and his nephews Kilu Yolda, and we have Abai in the Gemara says Amali Aim, that was his stepmother. We have many rayas that the pseudo parents deserve the same treatment and have the status of people who you owe an endless debt of a hakaras hatov. But that doesn't take away from the pashat, the pasuk of the Gzeres HaKosov, unless emotionally you can't deal with them, which is why I say, some people think it's a kula, is that you're not mechuyev to go find them. Because it can bring up so many emotional issues that you can't deal with the kibbut aveim, and you'll be in negative territory.
Well, I would just add on to that since most poskim on that appearance can be meichel on their kibbut aveim.
Right.
Clearly, parents who gave their children up for adoption do not want the child, and there's no greater mechil of kibbut aveim than giving up a child for adoption.
Either they don't want, they couldn't handle, and they understand that comes with the territory once they put the child up for adoption. Correct.
Rabbi Viener, as always, it's most enjoyable and an honor to have you on with us.
Hatzlacha Rabba. Kol tov. Take care. Bye.
We have the honor of having with us on the phone Rav Yehuda Kelemer, who's the Rav of the Young Israel in West Hempstead. He's a Talmud of the Mir for many years. He was a Talmud of Reb Chaim Shmulevitz, Reb Nachum Trucker, Reb Nachum Pertzovitz. He's an Einikel of the Kanaran, the great Reb Aaron Volkin, who was the Rav in Pinsk, Kalin, was killed by the Nazis. one of the great Talmidei Chachamim in the world at his time. Welcome, Rav Kelemer.
Good evening, and Yeshua to Rav Lichtman for his Harbotzos Torah, which is done with great depth and with scintillating clarity. Just very briefly, a thought on Kibbutz of Mara and Kedushin, I think it's Lamed, where it says about an Ashkelon that someone who was a guy was his Kibbutz and wouldn't wake up his father, even though it was a question of a great prophet. Incredible prophet, Chachamim needed the Torah Duma and the runner for the Choshen, and he wouldn't wake him up, and eventually he had tremendous schar and reward for that. Moshe Fanchi Zechat raises the question that he would have wanted to be woken up, the father, and why don't we follow the Umdana? And Moshe gives a certain possibility, but essentially remains with the question, the Dibros Moshe. I was privileged to be Mishamish Rabbi Yashav, Secretary of Kodesh Levracha in Yerushalayim for a few years, and when he was in Oel Moshe, when he left the Benzion Agadol, and I heard from him the following. I heard from him that we don't judge by Umdana Demuchach when it comes to Kibbutz. The fact that you gave him momentary tsar, that tsar in itself already is a violation of Kibbutz Ve'ein, whether or not there's an Umdana that he would have wanted to have been woken up. And what I understand from Rabbi Yashav is that the definition of kavod then is not just respect. That's a neutral definition, a part of a definition. Simply respect, maybe we would have umdanas. We have to translate kavod into a much deeper level and a much more poignant sense of commitment to a parent, and that is it's a sense of reverence. The proof is from the Gemara itself. Hishva Kadosh Baruch Hu Kibbutz Aveim L'chvodo. The various psukim that equate Kibbutz to the kavod of Ribono Shel Olam. So if we follow that notion of Hishva, and I even believe Rabbi Yashav mentioned that Gemara in the course of understanding why he wasn't woken up and why that was Kibbutz. If it's truly Hishva, then we have to learn it precisely. For the Ribono Shel Olam, it's more than kavod. It's reverence, and for the father, it's reverence. If that's the interpretation of kavod, then we can understand the Gemara, possibly have a resolution to Moshe Zatzal's question, at least from the perspective of Rabbi Yashav. This would explain also Rabbi Yashav's remarkable Psychologist, which I believe by now is well known. I was also privileged to hear this from him, where someone in the courts in Israel was accused of fraud, and his lawyer, as an attorney, told him that if he said that the father pressured him to collude with him in the fraud, then that would be a mitigating factor, and his sentence could be reduced anywhere from 10 years, from a 10-year sentence to a 5-year sentence. Rabbi Yashav was asked, could he embarrass the father publicly? This would be part of the court record. Could he publicize that his father persuaded him to join the fraudulent enterprise? Would he be able to do that in order to save himself so many years in prison? Rabbi Yashav Paskin very clearly, you're not permitted to embarrass a father publicly.
That would be a problem of Makla Aviv, wouldn't it be?
Right, and that's why that would answer the question which Reb David is indicating, because the question is, it's Michel Ov and not Michel Ben. Isn't years in prison considered Michel Ben, and therefore that would be a Patur in Kibbutz Aveim? That's something you have to be mayan in. I think there's a defense of Rabbi Yashav Psak. Either way, you see from that Psak and the original interpretation of the Gemara in Kedushin, you see a line, a clear consistency between both Piskei Halachos, that we need to redefine kavod as reverence. And the kavod of Ribono Shel Olam is a mercha kavod. It's the essence of our neshama, And the essence of the Masorah of Am Yisrael is that we have that kind of level of reverence for a parent. Thank you very
Rabbi,
much, and Yeshikolach again, Rav David.
Rabbi Kelemer, can I ask you a few questions?
Yes.
So now you have issues that a lot of schools feel that they could sort of hijack the children. You know, the chinuch you get at home is one thing, but it's the Rebbe and the school have become basically the arbiters of what chinuch is supposed to look like. Do you think that it's appropriate for a school, like what right does a Rebbe or a school have to say with your parents' wishes and how you should dress, what you should learn, how you should look are secondary, and we as the school, we're going to fashion who you are? Do you think that that is a problem with kibbud av v'em?
So it's a broad question. I do have that same problem. I often speak about that. Rabbeim should not be surrogate parents, even though there's a Rashi and of course the Rashi in Chumash. I'm just leaving a taxi for the moment. There's a Rashi in Chumash of Shnatu Avanecha, Ewa Talmidim. Nevertheless, that the Rabbeim should respect sometimes the Masorah of parents. And very often parents have Masorah. It's interesting that the Avos are called Avos. Korin Lavos Elashlosha. So we have, our foundations are from Avos. They were our Rabbeim too, 100%. Their title of Avos. And there was a time when we gave their title. So if anything, the Rebbe has to nurture a child with respect for the parents and that Masorah. Obviously, there are many situations where it's so clear and blatant that the parents are in fundamental disagreement with halacha, and even that has to be mediated very carefully to understand why the parents are doing so, and to bring them. To bring them. A Rebbe should also be sensitive to the pasuk Ve'eshuv Leivolo Salbanim, and be able to effect that reconciliation between the parents and the. If indeed he calls his own Talmidim Banim, those Banim need to have reconciliation with their parents, and there are ways of doing that, which even the parents could understand. So you can't have one klal for all the situations. It's ein b'chal mashesh b'frat. But Reb David, I agree with you, or at least I agree with what you're intimating, that the Rabbeim need to have a dialogue with the parents and to have a child understand that there can be a role for kibbud av v'em to some degree, to some significant degree, even when they are not permitted halachically to follow a parent's advice.
Now
I remember of Gifter saying that the only reason in Tells, I learned there for a number of years in the Tells in Cleveland. I still remember when he would get up before Ben Azman and would say, "We're sending you home because we want you to not to necessarily only sit Yom Halayil on the Beis Medrash, so you have an opportunity for kibbud av v'em." So remember very clearly the clarity in which he gave that shmooze, and that's the Masorah, I believe, of other Gedolei Yisrael.
So what do you do when a parent within the confines, we're talking about from a parent, wants to bring up his child one way, and the school wants to bring up the child another way? Does the school have a right to override the din of kibbud av v'em that the child has for the father? The question is, what is different about the chinuch? To what degree are the parents in any clear violation of halacha? We're not talking about halachic violation. We're talking about from appearance. I mean, most
so I would have a problem where Rabbeim would want to be surrogate parents, even with Rashi. If I'd have another opportunity, we could discuss that Rashi. it works both ways. There's also that maybe the opposite side, the opposite point of the Rashi is that your own son can be your Talmud too. It works on two directions, that Rashi. In the Shema, on the Vahafta. There's a lot to discuss about that. In principle, I feel that a parent shouldn't be prepared to be a surrogate. No, a Rebbe shouldn't be prepared to be a surrogate parent, unless. But the Shach, the proof is from the Shach. Avedas Rabba Kodim Lavedas, right? Oviv, Horaah, so the father, the Rebbe comes first. And the Shach says if the parent pays tuition, same as Shach, and already the father comes first. Is the Rebbe prepared to pay the tuition for the child? So he should take precedence? I wonder. Maybe some Rabbeim certainly will help children sometimes when they won't go to yeshiva otherwise. That I have seen, I do notice, and that's a tremendous milah. Do you see what the Shach says? The parents' mesiras nefesh, to be able to struggle and put bread on the table and pay tuition, gives them possibly precedence over the parent. Now, that Shach needs to be analyzed very carefully and deserves its own share. But clearly, you see how someone like the Shach understood what it means in the mesiras nefesh of a father, of a parent. So I would have a problem of a parent imposing his own derech hachinuch on the child.
You mean a Rebbe?
However,
you mean a Rebbe?
The Rebbe, rather. The Rebbe. But if indeed the child gravitates towards it or has a nakuda in his neshama to follow a particular derech and a higher road than what the parents would envision for him, then he needs to use his talent of persuasion. Just like he persuades the Talmud in Pshat in the Rashi and the Tosfos, he should be able to persuade a parent also in the Pshat and the Neshama of a child and work with the parent. Ultimately, if there's a conflict and there's an impasse, then you go to a Gadol B'Torah to see which derech to take. But the sensitivity to the parent should be given primacy.
Now, what do you, Rabbi Kelemer, what do you do when a parent says, I don't like the fact that you're dressing a certain way, and the son says, listen, this is who I am. I want to dress this way. And it could be both ways. The parent could be a modern parent who his son wants to maybe dress, more yeshivish or hasidish or whatever. It could be a visionist parent who the kid wants to become a belza. It could become a boy who wants to wear colored shoes and colored shirts and a striped suit. And the parents, it could go in any direction. And the parent says, you're embarrassing me. And the child says, listen, it's not machileu, it's not mashkeu, I'm mechabde. If me expressing who I am is embarrassing you, that is not part of kibbud aveim. How would you respond to that tension?
So there are two elements in your question. One element is that the Masorah is that you listen to a parent even when it's not machileu mashkeu. As you're aware, right. There's a machlokas rishonim on that. Right. Rabbi Yasher follow the opinion that you follow Masorah of a parent even when it's not machileu mashkeu. That's agav. But others see it only as machila, as fundamental protections.
The Rajba, the Marik,
right. Great. The others, of course, that see it that. But there are others that follow the Masorah, and that you ask the parent, and that becomes a very sensitive issue by shidduchim. But apart from the fact that that's not simple, the child, again, you have to deal with the child very gently. And how many people today who themselves are Rabbeim and who are Makadosh Shem Shemayim Barabim in the field of Chinuch or Rabbanos themselves came into yeshiva with a very, as I say, as colorful personalities, and they weren't immediately, the arm wasn't immediately twisted, and Rosh Yeshiva worked with them slowly, had sometimes an older chavrusa, and slowly moved the child into a different understanding what the Gemara speaks about, Mani de Machabdusa. And all of that has to be done with a tremendous sense of Ava, and tremendous sense that you don't make sudden changes. Whenever you make sudden changes, then so often years later, and I've seen this, the child, when he's an adult, changes all the way back to the original, his original appearance. Seen that very often. So Hatchak Zo Halachatz in the Haggadah is a Midas Mitzrayim. It has to be done with with gentility. And the Tziv has an amazing pshat in Hocheach Tochiach. It's unfortunate it's not publicized. In all the English translations, it says what? To chastise and to rebuke. Take a look at the Hamik Tover, how he slipped in so subtly that the Lashon of Hocheach Tochiach, he said, 2 words, is a Lashon Vikuach. It's a Lashon to learn how to argue, to debate, to discuss, to have an ongoing conversation, which takes much more Mesiras Nefesh than suddenly just laying down the law for a child. That takes so much more of the reservoirs of Chachma of a Rebbe or of a parent to try to navigate all of the child's resistance in such a way in which to make a kinyan hanefesh much longer period of time.
Rabbi Kelemer, is it my imagination, but the current generation in America certainly seems to, even though there are stories of kids off the derech, etc., but we are retaining a far greater amount than we did in Europe. Is that true?
Greater what?
A far greater amount of the children are staying within the fold. Like in the Litta, they say before the war was 90+% irreligious, and in America, it's the exact opposite. It's 95% that stay religious.
Well, they fought the battle, and we're the beneficiaries. That was a time when it's hard for us to judge. That was a time when the Haskalah movement and then the neo-orthodoxy so often swept away people. It was like an intoxicant, and when you have that kind of intellectual intoxication, you know what happened in what happened in all the yeshivas, Volozhin tells, and other yeshivas, and the conflicts that occurred, and it was heroic on the part of the Rabbeim to maintain their stand. But we can't judge that at all. We can't even make a comparison. It's categorically different, that generation from our generation. But then it was an intoxicant. It became such a, and it was, and of course everything was claimed to be l'shem shamayim. They didn't even have to, and they came with values that were imported from the secular world totally, and transplanted onto the halacha or to Chazal or to our hashkafa, and the kind of kilayim that they saw was so deeply attractive. We can't even understand the kind of attraction. Remember, we can't understand how there was a yetzer for avodah zarah prior to Anshe Knesset Hagdola offering a tefillah and being mevatel it. That it wasn't even an issue of having to go out and wage a warfare. They had to literally ask the Rebbe Shalom to step in and to dilute the nature of avodah zarah. So it's the same thing with what they faced. They faced such a powerful current, a tidal wave, and just to survive the tidal wave, that itself was a koach on the part of the great Rosh Yeshiva. People who wrote texts. There were people who wrote great texts, and then you had Musar Mashkichim like the Nichlev Miliol that took a generation that could have easily have been swept away, and their depth of their machshava countered all the alien machshavas and philosophies that could have penetrated into the yeshiva world. So we can't even. I believe. I'm sorry for the background noise. We can't even understand how potent those challenges were. And
I mean, Rabbi Kelemer,
and we don't have that. So today we do have many new movements that are coming up and surfacing, and again, those new movements are becoming very attractive and have a certain glamour, and are being represented even by individuals who represent Torah and Halacha. The battles are still there, but we can't compare that to what they face. We just don't understand I don't believe we can understand and fathom the potency and the enormous influence that those hurricanes were intellectually, and swept away so many.
Rabbi Kelemer, when I speak to mechanchim today, they say that children have never been challenged the way children are today because of the access to the internet and social media, and teenagers today see when they're 14 or 15 more than their grandparents saw when they were 75. Would you agree with that or not?
Right. Yes. The difference is there's a category error here, and that is that what they're swept away with is not as potent and overwhelming. It's becoming a little bit from an intellectual challenge, because we are, as the Maharal says, we are the ones who are the Balei Seichel of the world, and the Ki Chochmasim Ubinaschem, and if that's Kolach HaSeichel, that moves in different directions, so many different directions, and that being the case, it's easier to counter with all of the material and the corrupt kind of attractions that you see in the secular world, and that's countered by an emotional counter balance, that we give the emotion, we give the nagina, we give the depth, we give the melody of Torah, the sweetness of Torah. But they faced, but their battle was much harder. When the battle is intellectual, when it appeals to the intellect, the Rashi says in Shabbos, the Vega quotes in Bava Kama, the first Gillian Hashas, that the Malach that we have is Seichel, and they challenge our the essence of our godless is our Chochmah and Bina, and they're probing. They initially in that generation, they challenge that Kolach HaSeichel. So that means even within the yeshivas, even with the great yeshivas that had that challenge, they were being confronted with the same tool that we use in order to understand the Ribbon Shalom. They came with the very same tool. What the world is presenting, at least until now, is a challenge that in itself is havoc and pandemonium, and that's the kind of havoc and pandemonium that confuses the seichel, robs a ben Torah of his intelligence.
Can I suggest a different possibility, Rabbi Kelemer?
Yes, of course.
I think that before the war, the Jews were intoxicated with a world, a free world, an open world, an ideal, a world full of possibilities, a secular world. It's sort of like the yeshiva bacha. You take somebody out of the ghetto and you put them in Times Square, and their eyes pop out. They had no inoculation. They had no exposure, and when they exposed, it's like you give somebody who never had a drink, you give him a bottle of whiskey, and he takes a shot. He says, "Good." The next thing, he's lying on the floor. where
I
somebody
see that exposure today. Today I see that. Yeah, you're right.
So my point is that is it possible that certainly the Jew in America has been exposed, and when he sees something that would have swept away maybe somebody from another generation, they shrug and they say, been there, done that, seen that, I'm sorry, I'm not impressed. So in a way, like when they came to America, Reb Shraga Feivel came to America, and he wrote from Chaim Eizik. He said, am I allowed to allow secular studies in schools? The Lashon shut down because of that reason, and he allowed him to. But everybody thought that would destroy Judaism. On the contrary, it made us impervious, and it inoculated us, and it made us sort of, we've done that, we've seen that, we're really not impressed. So, you can build a ghetto wall and say the ghetto will keep us holy, or you can build a very tough breed of Jew who says, I've been there, and I don't see anything out there that really impresses me. And could it be that if we had that exposure, if we had Jewish doctors, Jewish lawyers, Jewish accountants, Jews do you know that during the Rabbanei Mitam, the great machlekes of the Or Sameach and Reb Chaim, the Or Sameach said the Rabbanim should speak Russian.
Should learn the vernacular.
And Reb Chaim said, no, they can't speak Russian. And in retrospect, could you imagine a Rav in America who can't speak English? Like, how do you read the paper? How do you know what's going on? How do you know who the president is? How do you talk to the young generation? And the Chafetz Chaim and Reb Chaim felt it was asa to have to require a Rav to speak the language. And the Or Sameach took the other position. He said, how do you protect your community? How do you stay relevant to your young generation if you don't speak the language? And in America, we've clearly gone with the derech of the Or Sameach, and we lose very few children because our derech is so much wider and accepts so much more than they could accept in the yeshivas in Europe. Is that a possibility for why we are retaining so many more of our youth?
Right. I just would argue the point that that's why you have Gedolei Yisrael on every door. As the Chafetz Chaim, as Rabbi Chazoni said, you don't fight a war with the old kind of artillery. Famous mashal of Chazoni. We need each generation has its new artillery. It's famous mashal. I don't know if we're deciding more like Rameir Simcha, like Reb Chaim. For that generation, may have needed Reb Chaim and the Chafetz Chaim's approach. And for our generation, we have Gedolei Ador, thank God, that the Rebbe Shalom makes sure to implant in every generation. And they understand for this generation, we needed to have Rabbanim who speak the vernacular. Otherwise, we would lose. We would lose so many. And that we could use the vernacular itself and be makadesh it in such a way in which it could convey Torah also, the way we see so many of the translations coming up, even though they don't match the original Hebrew in any way, the original Lashon HaKodesh. So every generation has its Gedolei HaTorah who understand the needs of that particular generation. So for that generation, Reb Chaim's approach may have been the one that was important, and for our generation, we may have to have some of our Meir Simcha. And nevertheless, we still have much of what Reb Chaim has in our generation, and we should need to appreciate that also. My only point is that the original generation was not taking a Jew, I believe, in Times Square. It exposed him to powerful philosophies in the secular world that that swept the non-Jewish culture, and works of what seemed to be the deep thinkers who struggled with religious issues and put religion secondary, and advanced a kind of a Weltanschauung and world philosophy with great intellect and many of their prominent books, which were filtered into yeshivas in a way in which was subversive. So that was much different than taking a child in Times Square. That was taking the intellect of B'nai Torah and challenging them with a frontal attack. And many were swept away in that. today, I agree with you. It's taking a child and putting them in Times Square, and they need to have, some need to be insulated, and others need the approach that they need a taste of secular studies that was supported by many Gedolim. And many Gedolim, as you know, insisted that the secular departments in their yeshivas, the Lithuanian yeshivas, should be of a top level. Once you're doing it, until they felt that you have to do it well, and you have to educate them well. So that became itself a tool of Kiddush Shem Shemayim. I'm not arguing with you, Rav David. You're right. I see the difference.
I don't know what it is.
A little bit differently than you see it. Either way, the Mahalach has to be guided by Gedolei Torah, who very much are the most practical. My Balabatim have told me for 30 years, the Lashon that they used in one of my previous positions, Rabbi, how is it that Gedolim can make factual analysis? They're brilliant in halacha, but they don't know the world. They don't understand the world. And I answer quite often that the Gedolim understand the world far better than many of your professors do, possibly, and many of your teachers. They understand the world far better than, and they have an acute understanding and perceptive ability, which Torah gives Gedolei Torah. And they understand the world, and they know which methods to introduce and to cope with that, and which methods they don't allow. So this Nakuda of the understanding that Gedolei Torah do have a sense of what is happening and what is different from one generation to another could resolve that old disputes in that generation where we follow Reb Chaim doesn't mean that in this generation we can't have somewhat of Rameir Simcha. And even then, Reb Chaim's approach has to be appreciated and preserved and even sometimes exalted. That's the idea of Sha'ar.
Well, Rabbi Kelemer, it's been a big honor to have you on with us and to get such a
thank you for your discussion. I hope and pray that your Torah will be in the getter, continue to be V'shirei David Avdecha, HaShomayim B'yirecha.
Amen.
I hope and pray you'll continue to do that. Be well.
Thank you very much, Rabbi Kelemer Kultov.
We have the honor of having with us on the phone Dr. Benzion Sorotzkin. He's a Talmud of Telz and Ner Yisrael. He's a Musmach from Rav Ruderman. He also learned in my alma mater, the Mir in Yerushalayim, a doctor of psychology. One of his areas of specialty is conflict between parents and children. Welcome, Dr. Sorotzkin.
Yes, Shalom Aleichem. Good to be here.
So, Dr. Sorotzkin, I think that conflict between parents and children is an age-old sugya. In fact, I think it says that doesn't the Navi say that when Mashiach, the Eliyahu Navi comes, he's going to be the Heishiv Lev Avos Albanim, Lev Banim Alavaisim. So it doesn't seem to be just a millennial issue, but it goes back a very long time. So let me ask you a few questions. So the practice of psychology is relatively new. So the concept of a child sitting down and talking to somebody about it, or an adult talking to his parents, is a relatively new issue. And there's not much of a body of halacha. And when I grew up, we know all the stories about Dama ben Nesina, etc. And the Gemara the Gemara in Kiddushin and Lamed Bais, where he was sitting among Chachmei Roimi, and his mother came and she tore his clothing and spit in his face, and that Heichen Kibbud Avim. So the first question would be, sitting down and talking to a psychologist about your parents. Yeah. I mean, are you allowed to? Is it Lashon Hara? Yeah. Is that called Kibud Av Aim? And even if parents are not there, you could take the argument: is that a kiyum of Ish Aviv Imoy Tiro Veshabsaisei Tishmairu Tsendaseres Adibris? It's certainly a very serious thing, and most of us growing up would never have a thought to say, A, that my parents could be wrong, and B, how could I possibly talk to somebody about it?
Yeah.
So as somebody who's a musmach and a Talmud of Rav Ruderman, I can't imagine that you would be listening to all these dvarim if they were divrei issa lashon hara. You would be over the l'fnei iver. Give us a halachic perspective of it.
Yeah. Okay. So first of all, I want to introduce that I don't consider myself an halachic authority. I'm not a paisik. Basically, I try to give my patients a broader perspective of what the possibilities are, and so they can then discuss it with their Rav, with their paisik. Okay, so I don't paskin for them. I just try to help them. Some of them are not aware. Many patients come to therapy believing, in part based on the story of Dama ben Asina, that the Torah is mechayev them to have absolute kavod and yira regardless of the cost, even if it drives them insane, even if the parents are overtly abusive in a way that kuli amalei pligi, that it's horrible abuse. There's no give, there's no flexibility. That's what they believe, and that simply is not true. Exactly where you could be mako and when there's a makam task, where there's a room for flexibility, that a Rav has to paskin, and that's not what I do. But I open them to the possibility that things are not as they perhaps think. So, for instance, with Dama ben Asina, that is taught in all the schools and all the kids learn about it, Taisus there says that she was that the mother was a meterefes bedaita, that she was insane. It wasn't some a mother being mean to her child or embarrassing in front of everybody. She had Alzheimer's. She didn't know what she was doing. And even then, it's a big shvach that somebody didn't react. As anybody knows, anybody who unfortunately had to take care of a parent who had Alzheimer's knows that it's very, very testing on one's patience, and it's very, very difficult. And he did a wonderful job. But they usually don't tell anybody. Usually the kids don't learn that she was in Terefes the Daita, and they think that even if a parent does it out rishis, they still have to have unlimited kavod regardless. It's interestingly this agav that the Ramesha says in the Divris Meisha that the father with the Meisha with the jewels, that they were going to pay a fortune for the chachamim by the paraduma or for the ephod, and he didn't want to wake his father up. The keys were under the pillow. He didn't want to wake him up. He says that father was also Mistam in the Torah B'daita. He says it's a pella that doesn't say that in the Gemara, because which normal father wouldn't want his son to make a fortune for waking him up? So the son knew that his father wouldn't want to be woken up.
So it was a good marriage. The mother and the father were both insane. Right. Is basically what Rabbi is saying. Okay.
Right. But the point is, I'm just saying a person should know that a person doesn't necessarily have to, under all circumstances, no matter what the emotional cost, that he has to, have kibbut aveim, even if it's at the cost of his sanity.
The way what Taisus is in effect saying is Dama ben Asina was mechabed his mother, even though she humiliated him in public, because his mother had Alzheimer's or dementia. And we can understand that a mother who has Alzheimer's or dementia, we should not lose our temper, because we understand that an insane person is not responsible. But if she was a sane individual and she had spitted it in public, he would have had the right and maybe even the obligation to respond to protect himself against an act of rishis. Is that in effect what Taisus is saying?
Yeah. The Amshir Shleima discusses this at length over there in the Gemara. And he says that that case must be that the mother was mitzrefes v'daita, because otherwise he wouldn't necessarily have to let her treat him this way. And I asked one particular paisik, I once asked him, one of the Chashva paisikim in Eretz Yisrael, I have it in writing, I asked him, just like if you see your father about to do an isser, right, you're mechuyev to tell him respectfully in a nice proper way, to tell him to be mafashim from isser, and to tell him, it doesn't say in the Torah that you're not allowed to do that, and it becomes a way. So if a father is mistreating a child and treating him in a way that Hilchas Chinuch says he shouldn't treat him, which is also an aveira, is there a chiyuv al teichecha, to tell him that, Tati, isn't this the way you're really supposed to treat a child? He told me, yes, I'm correct. It could be there's a chiyuv, just like any other ister.
I think the lashon of the Amshel Shleim is, he says he should be yigar, but he should, if he wasn't mitzarefes bedaita, he said he should scream at her unless it's after the fact.
Yes, because then you can stop them. Yeah, Yiga, you're right. I'm not sure exactly the types of the word, but I don't know if it's off the screen or speak strongly. But yes, in Chanami. But I just want to say that besides the halachic perspective, which obviously is the most significant thing, it's not a favor to a parent to intimidate your child in such a way that he will respect you even though he's angry at you for good reason. It's not a taiva to the parent because it's going to undermine the whole relationship. And that's why people forget that it also says in Shulchan Aruch, and the Rambam says that after he brings on all the hilchos of kibbud aveim, all the very chashuv halachas and the different, all the ways you have to mechaber a parent, the Rambam says and the Shulchan Aruch says that also l'adam lahachbid oila albanav v'ledagdik v'chleida imam imahem shelo yavim lidei michshol el yimchol v'yisalein. Technically the child has to be mechabed you in all which ways, but if you're going to be too heavy-handed about it, it's going to backfire in your face. You might intimidate them so they overtly have to be mechabed you, but it's not going to be a grace nachas. So, waving the kibbud aveim flag as a substitute for developing a loving, caring relationship is no benefit to either the child or the parent. And I think there's he said it also, I saw from Rav Chaim Kanievsky. Somebody asked Rav Chaim Kanievsky, no, I'm sorry, no, one thing I'm getting confused with that. It wasn't. It was Yehuda in the Darkei HaChaim from Yehuda. Somebody asked him about a child who was chutzpahdik, and Chaim told him that, the Yehuda told him that even though, I guess this was a situation that wasn't so extreme, it wasn't overtly abusive, but he said there's probably a reason why the child is being chutzpahdik. He's probably being chutzpahdik because he's upset about something. He says it's up to the father to repair the relationship. And if you repair the relationship, you're not only doing a favor to take the initiative to repair the relationship. And it's not only a favor for the child, it's a favor for you because then it'll be combined upon him, and then it'll straighten out. You won't act this way anymore. So using it as a way of controlling a child is backfires.
So Dr. Sorotzkin, we spoke about the ability for a child or an adult to speak to a therapist. And it wouldn't be a shaila of lashon hara because I guess it would be l'tayelis, and it wouldn't be a problem.
Yeah, that's what Rav David Cohen said that. Yes, passing that way. Another place came that's l'tayelis.
And also, it wouldn't be a problem of kibbud aveim, and that would be because the goal of the therapy of any reputable therapist is to talk about the anger that the child already has that he's hiding and is causing him all kinds of symptoms that are worrying the parents because the parents love the child and they're very disturbed that he's suffering from anxiety and depression. They also want him to get better. It might be hard for them when they realize that the reason why he has this problem is partially due to the way they treated him. So that would be painful to them. But most parents, when I said at the end of the day, would give their life for their child. So the end goal is when the child finally is able to express what he's angry about, you help the child learn how to speak to his parents. Either you meet together with the child and the parents, or you can even sometimes say to the child, it's very understandable that maybe your father doesn't realize how critical he is of you, and therefore you don't really want to talk to him, and then he gets angry why you don't want to talk to him. You could tell him, and then you actually practice with him how to say it in a mechubatik way. Tati, I know you want me to have an open relationship with you. You many times asked me, why don't I tell you more what's going on in my life? Is it okay if I tell you why? If you not get angry at me for telling you because you're asking me? The father will probably say yes. And you say, usually when I tell you, you end up getting angry at me. So I hesitate to tell you. If you would not get angry at me, I'd be happy to tell you. So the end goal is to improve the relationship. So what you're saying is it because it's a gather of av shemachal al kvoide that he can speak badly about the...
Somebody asked I heard this that somebody asked to see the stipler. I think I have it in my article. Somebody asked the stipler. He said a father came to him and said, "My son talks to me chutzpahdik, so I'm very worried about his Zaylam Haba. What's going to be with him?" So the stipler told him, as far as your son's Zaylam Haba, there's a pashat to Eizik. You could be Michael him. The problem is the way you talk to him and you therefore provoke him to speak that way. He's not a bar mechila, he's a cotton. So I'm worried about your Olam Haba, not his Olam Haba.
Right, you'd be over.
It's very strange. Yes, there's very interesting things. Very often people who speak to children who are in conflict with their parents, they very much worry about the kids. Very admirable. They worry about the kids' Olam Haba. What's going to be with the kibbut aveim? They don't seem to worry about the father's Olam Haba. It's really not fair. The father, in those situations where the father talks very demeaning to the child, he provokes him, he gets very angry at him for not sufficiently good reasons, right? And he's over many, many Yisurim. There is no heter to embarrass a child. This is brought down in Svarim, that there's no heter to embarrass children and to, I think Rav Chaim Kanievsky, somebody once, a mechanech who gave parenting classes, once asked Rav Chaim Kanievsky, what point should he emphasize to the parents? Rav Chaim told him, and I quote, translated, tell them that the halachas of ben Adam l'chazeir also apply to their children. What's more, children are not able to be meichel. There's no heter to shame or insult a child. The belief that a parent owns a child and therefore is permitted to harm him is incorrect. This is so obvious that it shouldn't need to be said. Unfortunately, that's the end of the quote. Many parents look at kibbut aveim as a perk. You know, if you take care of your child and you feed him and you clothe him and you house him, so you get a perk. Like in certain companies, you get to a certain level in the company, you get a car. So if you're a parent, you get a perk that they're mechabed you. It's not true. It's not something they owe you. They're mechuyev and kibbut aveim the same way that they're mechuyev to put on tefillin. And you as a parent have to teach him how to have kibbut aveim the same way you have to teach him to put on tefillin. It's not something that they owe you. It's something that they're mechuyev inside the Rebbeinu Shalom to do. You happen to be the recipient. It's not a perk.
So, Dr. Sorotzkin, as somebody who's researched this, I saw you wrote a beautiful article, which we're going to post online about it. Is it fair to say that for a father or a mother to criticize a child in a way that most people would feel is unfair and is not helpful, right, is the same isser of einos dvarim that would be towards a stranger? Or just like you can't say something nasty to a stranger, just like the same din of halbanas pnei chaver barabim goes on a stranger, for a father or a mother to humiliate their child in public is the same din of halbanas pnei chaver barabim, which Taisha says is a din of yereg val yaver, and so does the Medrash, Zohar, etc. say it's the equivalent of one of the Gimel Chamuris, would have the same din of sinas chinam, would be over the asay of a hafta l'recha kamaycha. Is a critical parent, because of chinuch, get a free pass on all those isurim?
No, actually, what you just said, besides what I just quoted from Rav Chaim Kanievsky, there's a sefer called Sefer Abris. I think it was written about 250 years ago, but a very chashuv rav in Vilna. And Rav Shach writes that when he can't sleep at night, this is the sefer he looks at. It's a very interesting sefer. He has a very lengthy discussion that Rav Litvak writes in his sefer. He quotes it or he cites it in his sefer Kibbut Aveim. It's I have one of my other articles. I quote it in full, but he writes mamish what you're saying, that many parents think because of the chi of Kibbut Aveim, they're not obligated by all the chiyuvim of hafta l'recha kamaycha, and I know zvarim. They think they're not. He says not only is that not true, and they have all the chiyuvim of all ben adam l'chaverei, they're actually more mechuyev. Just like when it comes to hatava, giving stuck. If somebody has a poor brother that needs stuck and you don't give him, it's a much bigger aveira than if you don't give a stranger who needs stucca. The people that are closest to you, the chiyuv is greater. So the same thing, the positive chiyuvim of hafta l'recha kamaycha is a much bigger chiyuv on family members than it is on strangers. And it's Yedua what Rav Chaim Vital said over B'Shem Arizal, that if somebody does chesed to everybody except his family members, he will not get schar for what he does for others, because he's obviously not doing l'shem shamayim, whatever that means, but it's just the concept. So the Sefer Brit says it, B'Seirish, that and Rav Chaim Kanievsky says it, and other people say it. That's a dover pashit, that all the chiyuvim between ben adam and chaverei goes also on a parent to a child. Now, of course, there's a chiyuv of chinuch, but just like there's a chiyuv of teichacha on a stranger or on a fellow Jew, there's a chiyuv of teichacha. So that's not a heter to embarrass him. You have to do this with all the proper gedarim. So when a person has to give mussar to his child, everybody knows when you have a great Rebbe, he can give you mussar and you continue loving him, because he says it in a certain way, in a certain tone, in a certain attitude. The same way parents, of course, they have to give mussar, they have to give teichacha, but it has to be done in a way that doesn't cause sinna or distance or even,
So Dr. Sorotzkin, you spoke about how in therapy, the poskim say, yes, a child could speak, tell the therapist about his parents. Now let's talk about a really common case, which we've touched on, but I want to just make it out there. You have an abusive or a very critical parent, and I'm not talking about abuse that rises to the level of sexual abuse. I'm talking about just a nasty, and we've seen them in shul, these nasty parents. Now, does the child walk away? Does he just take it like Dama Ben Asina did? Or alternatively, does he tell the parents, you're really overstepping your boundary, and there's a mitzvah v'hafta l'reich kamocha, there are these usurim, and since you're being over an avera, I have the obligation to tell you this in a respectful manner. Like, how do we do that? And after that, I would like you to address with that for many people listening to this, it's going to come as a total surprise that they have that, that if indeed they have a right to speak back, how do we balance the tension of, on one hand, we know that there's a mitzvah of kibbud av v'em, right? On the other hand, there's an chiyuv of the parents to the children to treat them with the same respect that you would treat somebody else. I mean, we don't want people. We have a lot of bachrim who listen to the show to come say, "Wow, that mud pie for my father or mother I can find." How do we explain this? How do you explain the tension between all these chiyuvim?
So that's an excellent question, and of course, like everything else in life, there's a balance. Usually people get into trouble when they only know one side of the equation. I deal with some parents who are only aware of the chesaron of not disciplining a child. It becomes hefker. And there's parents who only know the danger of too much discipline, so they don't discipline at all. And obviously they're both equally dangerous. You have to have, the derech hamemutza. And of course, finding the exact sweet spot is always a challenge. I tell people that's like going to a doctor that thinks that the cure for every medical problem is surgery, or the doctor who's afraid to ever do surgery. So neither is going to give you a very good answer. You need somebody who understands the dangers of both and finding the balance. So of course, kibbud av v'em is an incredibly important mitzvah, and there's great sakonas if you don't do that properly. But you have to balance it, on the other side too. So what I practically is, first it depends on the age of the child. If the child is very young, so you basically have to work with the parents. You can't work through the child. I usually don't deal with very young children. I deal mostly with adolescents. But the ones who deal with young children, I usually suggest to them that they should work with the parents. And I must tell you, almost all parents want to do what's right for their child. Sometimes they have their own issues, and sometimes they grew up like that also with very critical parents. So to them, it seems like a perfectly normal thing. They're not comfortable thinking that their parents did something wrong, so that they're not willing to admit that. So therefore, they just continue doing what their parents did. But derech klal, very often parents, turn around completely, and sometimes there's astonishing results. When they do that, it could change everything. The whole chutzpah issue goes away. I just remember one incident. One parent came to me. I only met him once, which is unusual that I was able to have such hashpah in one meeting. But I explained to him this whole Indian. He was makabel, and he called me a few weeks later, or maybe it was months later, to thank me for what I told him. And he said he was so excited because he said my son let me buy him a camera. He understood that his son never let him get him anything because he didn't want to have any relationship with him. And now that he'd worked to repair the relationship, his son was willing to let him buy him a camera, and he understood how significant that was. It was a very impressive time. But usually it's more complicated than that. It requires a lot more work. So if it's a young child, you work with the parents. If it's an older child, I either help the child learn how to speak to his parents in a respectful way to elicit. The parents also want a good relationship with the child. And if the child can explain to them that the way you're doing it only makes me, it pushes me further away. I want to have a good relationship with you. Please treat me in a way that we can have and we'll both be happy. That often works. If that doesn't work, I sometimes refer the child with his parents to a family therapist who meets together the parents and the child, and they learn to communicate with each other. Some parents benefit tremendously from that. Some of them, unfortunately, are very resistant. One person that I referred to, a family therapist, told me that when he suggested to the father that they practice the child speaking, and the father listening and repeating to the child what the child said so he feels that he's heard, and then the father doing it with the child and the child does it with the parent, to show him that he heard what he said. The father was outraged. He says, "Are you telling me that I have to listen to my child?" And he went storming out of the office, so that didn't work out so well. But
so what do you do in a situation where you have an unreasonable parent who is basically, and very often these people are not just unreasonable parents, they're unreasonable people.
Sure.
And the child has to protect themselves. Is a child permitted to say, you know what, I'm not going home anymore. I am not going to visit my parents anymore. I won't speak to my parents anymore because I have to protect myself. What did the Rabbanim, what did the Poskim you speak to say about that?
So first of all, it's a very big b'diavad even psychologically because every child needs a relationship with the parent. So that's an extreme b'diavad. Every which way should be attempted to try to reconcile the child with the parents and work out a relationship that's tolerable and won't undermine the child's mental health. That's always the number one rule. Sometimes the parents are incredibly hurtful and sometimes they're just mildly unreasonable, and the child can learn to live with that in a tolerable way that won't undermine his mental health too much. But sometimes if it's extreme, it has to be discussed with the paisik who has a lot of experience dealing with this, because sometimes they don't realize, and the child sometimes I need to get permission from the patient to speak to the Rav so I can give a clear picture. And sometimes the Rav will say, I have to have no shaykhs with him. There's no other eitzah. That's a very rare, Baruch Hashem. But sometimes just not living near them or finding other eitzahs to minimize the contact so that it's not such a testing situation.
I mean, we have the Gemara in Kedushin speaks about Rav Asli.
Right. Mm-hmm.
Had a mother who was extremely
was his
impossible to get along with, and he just left the country. He said, "Look, I just can't." He said, "I won't have anything more to do with her," because I have seen situations where kids just have to protect themselves. They can't deal with the abuse or the dysfunction. Now, what would you say?
But I wanted to, excuse me, just one also important point. A big part of my job is to prepare the person to speak to the paisik, because they tend to totally underreport the problem. That's it, because they're either embarrassed to admit it to themselves or to the Rav how unreasonable their parents are. So they usually don't report it accurately. I remember one particular situation where somebody who I know told me about he was telling me that he visits his father. His father lives in Monsey, I think it was, and he goes once a month to visit him, and it's a horrible event. He was married already, but he keep it up. He would go visit him once a month, and his father would yell at him and embarrass him and insult him. But he told me he feels he has to go. So I told him it's not so partial. He should ask a Rav. And he went to speak to a certain paisik who I've dealt with, and he came back and told me the paisik told him that mitzvahs don't have to be so easy. You have to go anyways. I said, really? He told you that? That doesn't fit with anything he ever told me. So I met this Rav, and I asked him. I said, did you tell this to Pliny? He says, yeah. I said, what did he tell the Rav? So the Rav tells me, he told me, I go to my father, it's not so pleasant, totally underreported. So I told the Rav, no, it's not exactly what happens, and I told him exactly what happened. So the Rav says, well, that's a whole different story. Tell him to come back and tell me the truth. So part of my job is I actually sit down with him and I role play. What are you going to tell the Rav? Or sometimes I'll speak to the Rav myself, or to make sure that the Rav gets the complete picture and realizes how serious the situation is, so that he could paskin what the person has to do.
Now, I saw, to add on to what you're saying, let me give it a little flavor. I saw that the Poskim say that the mitzvah of kibbud av v'eim is a mitzvah saseh, and it's an important, it's on the Aseret Hadibros. But the rule with the mitzvah saseh is only ad chaimish of mamoneh, up to a fifth of your money.
Yeah.
So, for example, a person wouldn't have to leave the hospital to hear shofar. He says, because your health is certainly worth more than 1/5 of your money. You pater from shofar. And based upon that, when a parent is doing the type of damage where it's psychologically damaging, it rises to chaimish of mamoneh. It's a debilitating in certain situations. You wouldn't have to. But if it's just that the parent is a little difficult, well, you have difficult associates at work. We have difficult people who sit next to us in shul, etc. So, and that is really where you're saying you need a Rav. You have to be honest with the Rav and say, what is the level of difficulty that this is causing, where it could pater you from a mitzvah of this level. Am I?
There's also an yeah, that's 100% correct. There's another knetch here that makes it a little bit complicated. Because if you grew up with parents who built you up by not doing negative, by giving you a lot of positives, by giving you courage and giving you confidence and giving you esteem, so then that in itself makes it easier for you to deal with difficult boss or difficult coworkers. But when the parents themselves were too harsh or too negative or too critical, besides the negative they also didn't give you the positive. Somebody wrote a book about this called Running on Empty. When parents didn't do negative, but they didn't do enough positive, so that you're like running on empty. It was a recently published book, very interesting. So goof of the fact that the parents didn't do those positive things for you sufficiently makes it difficult for you to deal with them when they're being unreasonable. But that is the goal of the therapist when it's not really so bad, when it's more in the normal range, is to teach a child by helping the child learn to communicate. Most parents react positively when a child communicates clearly. When a parent, let's say the child made a minor error and the parent gets very upset or is very critical, and the child tells the parent, Ma, do you think I really deserve to be yelled at for that? I mean, I'd handle most of the situation well. For that little mistake, many parents, you'd be surprised, will say, I'm sorry, I was just not in a good mood, or, I'm sorry, overreacted, you're right. So it can be done in a pleasant way and in a way that elicits the parent's own desire to have a good relationship with the child. And if it's done in a Bekavadika way, many parents respond positively.
But I'm sure, Dr. Sorotzkin, you've seen many really dysfunctional cases. Like, I know somebody whose parents, his father didn't buy him tefillin for his bar mitzvah and said, go get a job and buy your own tefillin. Yeah. And literally, I mean, abusive, like just not like sexual abuse at any time, but physical, verbal abuse that is downright nasty. Like this person should not have had children. I mean, do you see a lot of cases like that?
No. Listen, obviously, I'm not seeing a random selection of the community. So I see more things that are extreme. But Baruch Hashem, it's not that common. But you actually remind me when you're talking about sexual abuse. I think I wrote about this. This is really what motivated me to write this article, because I was once treating a young lady who was sexually molested by a stepfather. It wasn't in America; it was in a different country, and it went on for a number of years until she got old enough to leave the house. And so when she got older, she didn't talk to her stepfather, didn't talk to her mother, who sort of never really protected her. And the family, the siblings who knew what happened, were hounding this girl. Why? Because she stopped talking to her parents, so they were hounding her. Where's her kibbut avein? I thought this was insane, and I told her I don't think you're mechuyev. But she, was very, very nervous about being over the Aveira. So I wrote to one of the big Paiskim in Eretz Yisrael. I wrote him a letter, and he wrote, because I know he's dealt with these issues, and he wrote me back that he wrote the Zeh Lashon, I have it in writing, in his handwriting. He said, B'nei mishpachtam meturafim b'datam. They're out of their minds asking her to have kibbut avein. When I showed her this was meniach her das a little bit. And then I realized how many people who are tortured when they're dealing with these extreme cases where there's nobody in their right mind can expect the child to have kibbut avein, and it was totally undermining the child's emotional sanity, and they're being tortured, and adding to all their tzaras, they're tortured that they're not being mekayim kibbut avein. That's why I wrote the article. And in response of putting this article on my website, I got tremendous amount of emails from tortured people. It's obviously heartbreaking, reading people that not only have to deal with parents who are so terribly abusive. And again, I have to emphasize these are the minority of cases. Baruch Hashem, usually it's not anything as bad. But in those cases where it is really terrible, where anybody would be made that's horrible abuse, the child has to have the added burden of feeling guilty that he doesn't have kibbut avein. And that was really my main motivation. Well, people should speak to Rabbanim and be open about it.
So Dr. Sorotzkin, I have a few questions for you. First of all, many Rabbanim would not be equipped to answer these questions. I mean, the Yam Shel Shloima, the Marik. I mean, this is not like Mishnah Berurah, Chelik Aleph, Siman Aleph. These are somewhat obscure locations. Speaking to a psychologist, abusive parents, these are relatively issues that have sort of come to light over as we become more aware of mental health. I mean, is it fair to say that many Rabbanim would say, no, follow them, and they wouldn't be aware? Who would you recommend? Give us one or two names. These are Rabbanim who are experts on the topic. They've gone through the Paiskim, the Chuvis, the Mishal Ben, Mishal Av, all the issues. Could you tell us?
Okay, I mean, obviously the ones who, some of the Rabbanim are senior Rabbanim, don't have too much time, unfortunately. But one of the ones I consulted with a lot was Rav David Cohen, He's also the head of Nefesh, the Rav of Nefesh, and he has a lot of experience in this area. Rav David Feinstein has a lot of experience, also extremely busy. But there are some younger Rabbanim now who, I don't want to really mention particular names, I'm not comfortable doing that, but there are some younger Rabbanim who have, become more, and I find almost all the Rabbanim, if the therapist speaks to the Rav, if it's a Rav who doesn't have that much specific experience in this area, he might be a huge Talmud Chacham in many areas, it just hasn't dealt with this a lot. I find that they're very open to talking to them. If the therapists make an effort, Aguda now has their pre-conference mental health seminar, and I find many times if you speak, you speak to the Rabbanim, they're all very eager to know. They of course they want to do what's right, and if they're not so familiar with these things, they will become familiar with it. I find the problem more that the patients are not so open enough with the Rabbanim to tell them exactly what's going on, so they underplay. The Rabbanim who have more experience know how to elicit the fuller information.
So, Dr. Sorotzkin, let me continue on this theme. A father, you mentioned sexual molestation.
Yeah.
A father of Russia, at least according to the Ramah and Reish Mem, there is no chiyuv of kibud. Do you find that? And that's how the Ramah, who and certainly the Abnei Ashkenaz do, and I think the HaShomayim says v'chein nayegim says there is.
The Rambam says that there is a chiyuv, but many Mefarshim say he means midrabanan. I think many say the Rambam himself means midrabanan. Yeah,
the Bach says midrabanan, but the Ramah disagrees, and our HaShomayim and most Poskim say we hold that a father Russia even midrabanan there's no chiyuv. Do you find that your patients who've undergone like serious abuse are aware of that there is no chiyuv of kibbud av to a father who would be a Russia, and sexual abuse certainly goes into the level of Russia?
Unfortunately, most of them are not aware of that. Unfortunately, that's one of the reasons I wrote the article, just to let people know, even not such extreme cases, to know that it's a shaila. You don't assume before you speak to a Rav and giving over the complete story.
Now, let me ask you another question. Shalom Bais. You have, and I've seen this, I've seen families that have gotten destroyed because of this. The son or the daughter, but let's talk about that, is overly, he's mama's boy or he's papa's boy.
Yeah.
And he takes kibbud av em. The Gemara says the stories of Reb Tarfon, and he used to bend down. His mother could step on his back. He used to put his hand so she didn't have to. And the Dama Ben Asina story. So the following case: young boy, young girl, straight out of some wonderful seminary in yeshiva, get married, and guess what? Maybe he's an only child. Maybe his siblings live out of town. Maybe his parents are just very demanding and always used to. And the wife now is married to 4 people. She's married to the husband and the parents. What do the Rabbanim say about his chiyuv kibbud av em vis-a-vis when it starts affecting his parnasa, affecting his relationships with his wife? I know a case where one couple, they lived basically in their parents' house for 20 years, al kibbud av em, and where do you say, hey, Dama Ben Asina has been taken way out of context?
Sure.
Give us a little bit of both from as a doctor as well as somebody who's spoken to Rabbanim about this many times.
So there's, I think in my article I quote from in the Sefer Binas Hamidais. Quotes from Ramosha Shapiro when he was asked some specific situation where a mother-in-law interferes in the family life and therefore causing shalom bayis problems. And he writes, they should tell the mother that she's not welcome to come into the house. He says it's a feirush there in the Sefer. Again, I would say nobody should ever pass on such. He writes there in the Sefer too that he should obviously have to speak to he writes interesting lashon. He says it's advisable to first consult with an impartial Torah scholar. And so he emphasizes it should be impartial, because sometimes you have a Rav who's very much involved with the parents, he's very close to them, so sometimes I guess it could be chashav she's not so impartial. But if you go to an impartial Rav and a Paisik and you explain to them the whole situation, how it's how it's undermining the shalom bayis, you'll be surprised what they'll tell you sometimes. Now again, you have to tell them the extent. If somebody just says, his mother comes and his mother-in-law comes and she demands, lakshin kugel, and his wife likes potato kugel, get over it. You have to learn to accommodate your parents and your in-laws. in a reasonable fashion and not have everything, even if it's a little bit difficult. But when it's over the top and it's extreme, then you at least have to know that there's a good possibility that you shouldn't do it, and you shouldn't undermine, and you shouldn't harm your shalom bayis.
And
so
would it be possible, Dr. Sorotzkin,
yeah.
Is it possible
yeah.
that the Makoyer of Rav Shapiro, because I'm sure he had a Makoyer, would be Shulchan Aruch, and again, I believe it's at the end of Reish Mem, says that if a boy wants to marry a certain girl, or vis-a-vis a girl, or the other way, a girl wants to marry a certain boy, and the parents say, no, we don't want that boy or girl. We want from this family. We want this. We want somebody better looking, richer, taller, skinnier, smarter, better. The boy and the girl, Shulchan Aruch say, do not have to listen, and it's based on a marik. And the marik says...
Marik, the Ramah, read that from the marik,
So he says, since there's the Torah, the biggest mitzvah in the Torah, we're coming up to Yom Tisha B'Av, is v'hafta l'recha kamoicha zu ikrei shel Torah, like the Gemara says, Hashar pirusha zil gmoir. He says it was more important that v'hafta l'recha kamoicha, the Marik says, than listening to the parent. So if in a shidduch, the v'hafta l'recha kamoicha shalom bayis, Chazal was so makbid to go out of their way and to say, don't listen to the parents, you don't have to. Marry the person who is, you'll be able to make a zivug, shalom bayis, which is the foundation of Klal Yisrael. Certainly, if they come to disturb this shalom bayis post the shidduch, the same reasoning should apply. Is it possible that is the svar?
The Marik actually gives three reasons. They're all very important. The reason that you're saying is a little bit different than you're saying it. He's saying that since Chazal, since Chazal has such a k'teida and shalom bayis, so it's as if the parent is telling you to go, if you're going to marry someone you don't want to marry, somebody your father wants you to marry, and you don't want to marry her, assuming you're not likely to have shalom bayis, it's as if your father is telling you to go connect Chazal, connect the Rabbanan. So that's one of the reasons that he said, and that's certainly in the car.
I think he says Mishal Av. It has to be Kibbud Av V'Eim, has to be
right. That's the second reason.
So he said if this is not at their expense, this is on your cheshbon. They have no right to do it.
And then he says he brings other sheet of the Machlekes Rishonim, and we pass him like the Rajva, who says that the chiyuv of Kibbud Av V'Eim is only on something that's personally negay of them. Who they can't tell you what shirt to wear. They can tell you to bring the food, to bring your chair. And so who you marry does not directly negate them.
I think the lashon Rajba Hanoas Gufa. It has to be Hanoas Gufa. The Rajba says.
Yes, right.
What we're taking away from this is that this is much more complex, and the Torah is much more nuanced than the halacha, and much more balanced and pro-child, and they either teach us in yeshiva and seminary. So ask your competent Rav, and we will give a list of competent Rabbanim to answer these shalos. But Dr. Sorotzkin, thank you very much for your time.
Sure. Okay, bye-bye.
We have the honor of having with us on the phone from Eretz Yisrael, Yerushalayim, Rabbi Yitzchok Eizik Silver, Talmud of Gateshead, originally from London, Brisk. Now he learns in the Mir for many years. He's the Dayan in the Bais Horaah next to the Mir. He's a Musmach of Reb Zalman Nehemiah Goldberg, the Eidim by Reb Shlomo Zalman, Reb Nosson Tzvi Finkel, Zechron Levracha, the Rashiva in the Mir. He's a Mechaber of the bestseller, tens of thousands, Mishpatei HaShomayim, which was translated into English under the name of Code of Jewish Conduct. He's also the Mechaber of two Svarim on Choshe Mishpat called Sha'ar Mishpat, which was also partially translated into English under the name from Feldheim, Money and Halacha. It's an honor to have you with us, Rabbi Silva. So, Rabbi Silva, you have elderly parents or an elderly parent, and they're living at home, and it's become very burdensome. Are you allowed to put them in a nursing home? They really don't want to go. A nursing home is one of the worst places you can put an older person. There was recently an article in the Times how they keep cutting costs and services, and their job is, they see many nursing home operators see the elderly parents as a cash register. So can you put your elderly parent in that nursing home if it's become burdensome or not?
It all depends on many other factors. Of course, years ago, nobody would dream of doing that, and their parents were the most important thing, and everybody around would just suffer if necessary, and they wouldn't even suffer because they knew that that's what they had to do, and there was no choice. Nowadays, we're a weak generation, and if the old parents are going to be hanging around in the house, then it's going to be very difficult for everybody around. Now, very often, even before we're thinking of putting them in the nursing home, we already can't take care of their needs. There are things like changing their diapers. There are things like just turning them over a few times a day or night so that they shouldn't get bed sores. Not always have the children got the physical strength to be able to do that. They are also, I don't know if you want to put this on the air, but there was a story I had last week of somebody who's in a wheelchair, and when nobody else could help, one of his sons had to put the catheter in for him, and the child was very, very, like a teenager. He was very, very broken by the whole story. So we're not living in a generation that people are normal enough to realize what the HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants us to do and what we have to do in the world, and people are weak. And when there is, you could bring a certain amount of foreign help into the house, but at some stage, even that is sometimes just not enough. And the parents, it will be best for the parents in a home for many reasons. Sometimes the children don't know how you lift the parents off their bed onto a chair or wheel them, even up or downstairs or whatever it is. There are many, many situations where the home can take better care of them. There are also certain situations where a parent needs medical assistance. And there are, of course, problems about the child, let's say, giving an injection to a parent, which, of course, if there is a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law or a grandchild, it's best that they do it. But if nobody is available, then a child would do it. These kinds of things would be easier if they are in a nursing home. Of course, if we're talking about sending them to a nursing home where people may be cruel to them and may not give them their needs, so then that's we have to do anything and everything in our power not to let that happen. I hope I'm not exaggerating if I say that pidyon shvuim is the highest form of tzedakah, and if it's pikuach nefesh, then it's even higher. Of course, the main form of the best tzedakah.
Respectfully, Rabbi Silva, isn't pidyon shvuim according to the Gemara only when it's pikuach nefesh? The Gemara in Baba Basra says isbei kulana. And it has to be because that's what the Gemara says.
No, the Gemara says kulhu isnahu
right.
Bais. The Gemara says that it's mafurish and then it's the Kelemer I think it's in Rosh and Bais in Yehuda. It's mafurish. There are many levels under the simonim and the surrounding simonim. There are many levels of pidyon shvuin, and pidyon shvuin is even when there's not a sakana. And pidyon shvuin derech agav does not mean when a girl decided to throw off her Yiddishkeit and become a homeres lahachis or whatever else and be mishtamedes and go marry a cruel Arab, and then that's not pidyon shvuin bringing her back. Her children might be tinoikes shenishbu, but that's not pidyon shvuin. Pidyon shvuin, if a Jew got captured, like it happens still in Mexico and other countries, and you've got to redeem him. Even if they're not going to, they used to sell them as slaves, even if there's no sakonas nefoshes. At the end of the day...
But what do you do with the Gemara of Kula Ispe, that has to be sakonas nefoshes? It's the Pharisee Gemara.
Levels. There are different levels. The Gemara is talking about, in a case where they are, possibly, where they've, let's say, be taken away by the opposite army, and they're possibly going to kill them, or they could starve them, or thirst them, or torture them. But usually in the olden days, the pirates and the highwaymen in the forest, they would actually sell them as slaves or use them as slaves. They weren't interested in killing them. So, and sometimes people were taken just as a mushkin, a collateral. So anyway, let's go back.
Let's go back to.
So when an old person is stuck in an old age home and is not happy there, and some of them haven't got their mind, but even though they haven't got their mind, they do have their feelings. It may be that grandma just came out of the shower and she thinks she needs another shower immediately, but in her own habitat with her own family, she's happy. Whereas when the cruel nurse shoves her into the shower and shoves her out of the shower, she just is miserable. And to a certain extent, it's like there's a mitzvah pidyon shvun to get them out of a place that's being cruel to them, because they are completely reliant on their, I don't want to call them captors, but they're paid workers who don't have patience for them, and they're completely reliant on them for anything and everything in life, and it's a very, very sad situation if they're stuck in a place where like you say, they're a cash register. So that's very sad, and the child has to do anything and everything in their power to put them in a place that will be as kind as possible to them.
So, Rabbi Silva, let me interject, because you a lot of information, but let me divide it. Let's say you have a case where the child cannot adequately take care of the parent because there's either medical needs or physical needs that you need professionals. I think that it would be easy to understand to move them to a nursing home. In fact, I would stolz to that. The Gemara which talks about Kibadav, the Gemara, I believe it's in Yevamis, where Rashi says it's al tzvahaftal arecha kamoicha. We have to do what they would want. It's in Sanhedrin, in Eloi and Anachnakim. Yes, in Eloi. Yeah,
that was the mention about giving him an injection. That
right.
Any doctor that amputates or operates is really paining the person. However, the doctor, if he would be in that position, would want that done to him.
So that's
right. So parents a little bit more. We do try someone else to do it when we're talking about causing blood to parents. However, true. That's what haftal arecha kamoicha. It is also true that.
So wait, let me just finish my question. So in a case where it's in the best interest of the parent to be there because the services they can provide are better, so that would fall under the haftal arecha kamoicha. But let's say it's not about medical needs but it's just become an extremely distressful inconvenience to the family. They can do it. It's just it's very tiresome. So in a case like this, do you say, well, it's tiresome? That's the mitzvah of kibadav. I mean, the Gemara in Lamed Bais in Kiddushin says that there's a din of bittul malacha. The whole din, even though we paskin Mishel Av, but the son has to pay if he has downtime of bittul malacha. We require the son to do it. So where do we say, look, this is just tiresome, and I'm sorry, that's the mitzvah, or do we say, look, it's just wiping out the family, this tiresomeness, and you can move them into a nursing home? So this is not so clear.
Right. So if you want to be square, there's a few things over there. There's ish imoy va'oviv tira'u, to fear them. There is kavidas of yichaves bimecha. There's also orur makle of the imoy. You can't degrade them and disgrace them. There is, and there's a klala for that. There is, and even someone who gives his father tzedakah, if he could have fed him from money that's not tzedakah money, he gets that orur, because that's gracing his father, feeding him from tzedakah money. There is also the union of kalala and hakara. People have to be careful from. Now let's get one thing straight. Only the actual child is chayav in all of this. So if it's her mother or her father, but if it's going to be his mother or father, and he is out at work all day, why does she have to take her old mother-in-law to the mountains and ruin everybody's holiday? So let's get, how much...
But wait, respectfully, Rabbi Silva, respectfully, there are many paiskim, and the Shulchan Aruch brings it, that a person is mechuyev b'kaved of aviv, or a grandparent too.
I'll tell you. So the chayav adam b'choid chomiv is to respect him like a respectable member of the community. Yes, but not on grandchildren. That's true. That's a husband, but not grandchildren. Is al kibadav. So let's go slowly through the midrashim that the Bach brings and work out how much of a shield people do have to their grandparents. When Yaakov Avinu brings korbanos to Yitzchok Aviv and not Avram Aviv, or whichever way around it is, the covered to a father's father is really respect to your own father. So they are chayav to respect his father, but not in necessarily the same way of machnisa moitzioi, machsoi mashkehu, malbishoi machassehu. Dozens of people have been past me over the years with the terrible problems of dementia, of Alzheimer's, of physical ailments, all different kinds, le'aleinu v'le'aleihem. that it could take 4 hours to dress her father every day and 4 hours later to put his pajamas on, or if he ever needs a shower. And I don't know if us young people realize that for older people, you just have a shower every day and finish. For them, it's like, oh, Wednesday, that's the day I have my shower because the nurse comes. It's like it really is time consuming. It takes a lot of patience. Sometimes I just last week dealt with somebody who's in a wheelchair, and the person who comes to dress him, he actually hits them. He physically hits them. He'll grab a hanger. He'll take the towel that they just bathed him with. He's in a wheelchair. He's paralyzed waist downwards, and he will hit with that towel. He will, and if he has nothing, he'll take the battery out of his electrical wheelchair and wham her with it. And they've been around a few psychologists and rabbonim, and people are all explaining it's very, very sad. But when people do get to the wheelchair situation, needing other people, sometimes these people were very, very independent and had a very bakovic place in life, and all of a sudden they're reduced to a wheelchair. It changes their whole character. If anybody does know somebody in a wheelchair who stayed nice and normal to everybody around him, that person has real, real good midas, because in the outside world, and this could become very, very difficult. This was a question about calling in social workers who, he's hitting younger people in the house and making demands of them. They're all kind of mind controlled to take care of him, because if they don't, then the whole thing is in a real, real mess. So they know they have to take care of him. On health can, this is a person that eventually, in my opinion, will wind up in a home, because there's no way that this can carry on, and the people around him are going to skive off one by one, and he is going to wind up in a home. The old people that's very extreme. They're not usually like that. They're not usually that bad at all. But
Rabbi Silva, in a case where a parent has either dementia or is difficult to that level, you have the halachic story of Rabbi, whose mother, it seems, suffered from dementia, and he just ran away to Eretz Yisrael, and the Shulchan Aruch and the Rambam bring it. So we have, so far, two categories. Somebody who has some type of a dementia or is extremely difficult.
Dementia is not Rav Asi. Rav Asi's wife must have some kind of nervous breakdown. Her mother must have had a nervous breakdown or been crazy. She was something else. She asked him, I want a shidduch. Okay, I'll see what I can do. Okay, I want a shidduch, someone as gorgeous as you. Okay, I'll see what I can do. So he was allowed to leave her, as the place can say, in good hands. Well, it's a big fuss in the Rambam exactly what
the Rambam disagrees.
Yeah, no, the Aruch HaShulchan. The Aruch HaShulchan is if a parent is crazy and violent, who's going to chain them to the bed? So maybe we should call in some outsiders to put the straitjacket on to chain them to the bed. Yeah, dementia. Let me tell you, dementia, they don't eat. They just forget to eat and they don't eat. Dementia, you can't force them into the shower. You can't force your parents into the shower. I get calls all the time. Can a child go with their parents into the shower, which they have to for safety, and they don't have a foreign worker or whatever it is? But what you're going to do if your mother doesn't want to go to the shower? So I'll tell you how these stories wind up. Eventually, she goes to hospital because she got an infection or high fever, or the doctor, whatever it is, and slipped over and broke a bone. And when she gets to hospital, the social workers don't let her home. And her children get screamed at, how did you let her get this bad? And that's it. Very often, they only get the foreign worker when they arrive in hospital, and the hospital says, we're not releasing, and the worst place to stay is in hospitals, until you show us where you can put this elderly person, and then you have a foreign worker. And that happens also to get them into the motor. So if this woman is not going to have a shower at all, and that's dangerous, and if she's not going to know how to eat, with man, woman, whatever it is, then you have to get them where on for professional, like you were saying before. We have to put them in a home where that's their job to kind of, syringe the soft food straight into their mouth.
So Rabbi Silva, we understand that somebody who, for either medical dementia, showering reasons, where it's in that person's best interest, it would fall under V'ahavta l'reach kamecha, and we should move them into a home and obviously take a lot of care into the quality of the home, that they're not a cash register at the home. That's A.
Right.
Let's talk to a more subtle case where the parent is able to shower. They don't need particular shots that have to be given. They've just become exceedingly difficult, and it's it's tiresome. How much work do you have to miss for an elderly parent? How do you define the much more gray area where it's they're normal, they're fine, they're pleasant, it's exhausting, it's very tiring, it could be very expensive as far as loss of wages, bittul malacha. Where do you draw the line in these more gray areas?
I don't remember who and how, but the Psychologist do speak about you being needing to take care of one day's wage for your needing. In those days they used to work their day's wage, and Loisolim Pula Socher is really he's nisla be'elan va'ola bekevesh to get his daily wage. They made a special takona that you can sell a dover sheloi bola oil mashe tala mitsudosi. People used to live on their daily bread. Everybody, not just Hillel Azokin in those days. So your daily, the Psychologist do say to have basic minimum that you should be able to pull through and have what to eat and drink. You can keep for yourself and you can work, even if we're talking about tircha. I don't know how that's going to work in the present situation. If you're working in a bank, and if you're one day here and one day not here and coming 3 hours late every day, first of all the children should always know that these situations do not carry on forever and ever, unfortunately. And as we're saying, they will wind up eventually with a farm worker or in a home or whatever it is. Very often the parents do have assets that the children want to keep as assets for the Yerush, which is wrong. We should be using their assets as long as they last for giving them their needs in the best way possible. So it's very, very hard to gauge it because people will lose their whole job. A child who wants to go to live in a different town, even if it's not to learn Torah, somebody wants to go and become a doctor, and he has to go to university in a different town, and that's where he wants to settle, and that's the best place for him. But he can leave his parents, and then his parents will just have to find a different form. If he's there, he has all the dinim of covered. But if he's not there, he can leave his parents and go to a different town. So there is a certain amount of Michel Ben if he's mamish going to have a wreck and ruined life, and he won't be able to get back on his feet in whenever it will be. And so although it's true that you have to work very hard to give your parents whatever they need, anything that they get direct hanor from, but not to go knocking on doors for them or running around different offices arranging their paperwork, but what they're getting direct hanor from, like feeding them and clothing them and whatever. Yeah, a child is supposed to give up all of that and know that that's what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants him to do, and that's what he's sent to this world for. And, it's a terrible thing. People say that a parent could raise 10 kids, but those 10 kids can't take care of one parent. This is really what the Torah wants us to do, and he should be working very hard, provided he does have a parnosa and he's not losing his whole life. But in our generation, we're talking about different things. We're talking about the child winding up in a loony bin, or the child getting all angry with his wife and children and everyone else because he's so busy with this. So we have to take into account our own koichos. You're talking about old people that could really insult their daughter-in-law, and their daughter-in-law just can't take it anymore. In Even Ezer, there are halachas about who caused the fight. But there are sometimes you are not chayav kibbud overheim if your parents are being very cruel to your wife. Your wife comes first, and you just have to get up and go. So all of this would have to be taken into account. And the truth is, you can't really make any general rules. Every case has to be checked into individually. There are usually a few different members of the family living in the same house in our society, and unless if the parents are already very old. And there's usually the child who is taking care of the parents has a few of their own children still at home, and everybody is a whole world. It's like a zivug sheni. With a zivug rishon, you have a shonari shona with all its pressures with just one person. But in a zivug sheni, when sometimes there's yours, mine, and ours, there will be ours in the future. You have like 7 Shana Rishonos, getting used to all these new people all together. So you have to take everybody into account and everything into account. The child themselves are hired to put themselves out all the way if they have a physical and emotional koiches. But if they don't have, and they're not just being lazy and extra concerned, then they really don't have the physical emotional koiches. Then they're potter, just like somebody who hasn't got an arm can't make tefillin, and if he hasn't got a head, he can't make tefillin shorosh either. So too, if somebody hasn't got koiches, he hasn't got the koiches haguf and the koiches nefesh, he should not be skiving off, like the Mishnah Berurah says, and every little thing might be a big sakana, so I'm not going to put myself into that vita sakana to save somebody else. He shouldn't be skiving off and being lazy, but if he and the members of his family are too weak to take care of this, then we have to try and find the best place possible, and chas v'shalom not to send them to a bad place. Like we said, it's the highest form of tzedakah, even higher than supporting Amlei Torah, which is very, very high. The man yechziku, the Bais Hashem, Amlei Torah is the highest form of tzedakah to poor people who are Omo B'Torah, and and Pidyon Shvuin, maybe even higher than that. And to save elderly people from being in homes which will with hostility is real pidyon shvuin, and they should really put themselves out for it and definitely sell the parents' assets instead of looking forward to the Yerusha in order to put them in a friendly home rather than one of those kinds of homes. And they should come and visit as well as possible, because an important person with a lot of visitors, they're more careful. And they should, and bring presents to the workers in a place that they should have more cheshik to deal with this person nicely. And, okay, I hope I've been helpful.
Okay, so let me ask you another question, one more question. So here's the case. You have a son or a daughter. They want to live in Eretz Yisrael. And so we know that if it's learning, they could go wherever they can learn best. But let's say they already finished learning. Now we know for Parnassa they can go wherever they want, but they can get the same Parnassa local. So the parent says, listen, I really want you here. I want my children where I could see them. I love them. And then you have, but I want to live in Israel. And you say, look, that's a mitzvah, but it's not Doicha Kibbud Aveim. It's not learning. It's not Parnassa. It's Sha'ar mitzvahs. The HaShomayim is pretty clear about it. How do you deal with it?
So I'm not in the sugya right now, but if I remember correct, a child's free will to move around in the world and live in a place that he wants to live, not only to take his medical degree in Harvard, but even just wanting to live in Passaic, a child is allowed to get up and go and live wherever he wants. The particular, what you're talking about, the marik, about his father doesn't want him to marry a certain woman and he's got a mitzvah puravu, or his father doesn't want him to live in a certain town because over there the goyim blow up buses or mo'ililim al hayehudim or whatever it is. So he doesn't want his child to learn that. The child doesn't have to listen, and he can go and learn there. And but that is when you need a special reason. But generally, also, if I am going to have to live in the town where my parents live, and I don't enjoy that place, and I feel for many ways that I want many reasons I want to live in another town, so that may already be Michel Ben. Not only that, where is the of the parents? Because they want to be close to their children and see their children all the time, be with and have fun with their einiklach and all of that. Therefore, they want to, I don't want to use the word ruin the lives of their children, but, make demands of their children where they're going to live. That's not fair. The children also need freedom of movement and have to be allowed to decide themselves where to live.
And let me ask you a last question. You have a parent who is alive, and they want one thing. The mother is alive. Usually husbands predecease their wives. That's what the statistics tell us. And she wants the thing, and your father was makbid as could be against that particular thing. What comes first, the kavod of the living parent or the kavod of the parent who's deceased?
Definitely the kavod of the living parent. Definitely. I remember this clearly. The living parent is much more important. There's a lot about if your father doesn't want you to say Kaddish for your mother because of Ein Hara or whatever, so you don't have to live. You don't have to listen. Your father also has a din of there's a lot of read about in different poskim that your father also has to have the Reach Kamoicha for your mother. So, of course, you could take someone else to say the Kaddish if it's Kaddish. So, if that's the situation. So, so definitely the living is more covered. The Mechabde La'achamisa is nowhere near as strong as the Mechabde Nechaim.
Well, Rabbi Silva, it's been a big honor to have you on with us. Thank you very much for your time.
And this is the answers to last week's halacha riddle.
I'm calling to answer the riddle about Pinchas and Zimri. One possible answer could be that it is true that Zimri could have stopped Pinchas from killing him by separating himself from Cosby, but you could compare it to a case where someone says, if you don't start jumping rope, I'm going to kill you. So I don't have to listen to him and start jumping rope, and then if he tries to kill me, he's a rodef, and then I can go ahead and kill him if that's what I need to do to save myself. And we don't say to the person, no, since you are able to save yourself by jumping rope, you're a mechuyev to start jumping rope to stop him from being a rodef. I do what I want to do, and if someone else chooses to be a rodef, then he has a din of a rodef, and then the din is nitin la'atzilei b'nafshay.
I hope you got some valuable yediyas and you enjoyed the Divrei Torah from our Chashuv Rabbanim from around the world. We had England, Eretz Yisrael, all over the United States. And I'm wishing you a wonderful week. I hope you tummel about the riddle and you're able to come up with the proper answer. Say it over by the Shabbos table. Get everybody getting into it. This is David Lichtenstein for the Yeshiva Shalmayla. Kol Tov.